the city of Bronzix. From a distance, it looked like any other thriving town in the kingdom. In the center of it all, a golden statue stood as a monument to some long-gone hero. Down on the streets, people went about their day. Kids were running around and everything seemed perfectly normal. As a couple of guards walked their patrol route, one of them remarked on how peaceful everything was. His partner wasn't so sure though. He was worried about when the revolutionaries might act up again. But the older guard just scoffed at the idea. He called them a bunch of country bumpkins and laughed it off like it was a joke. The younger one seemed to agree, saying that things had been quiet lately. He figured maybe the rebels finally realized their little fight was pointless. The older guard had a simpler explanation. He just assumed the Empire's knights had probably already taken care of them. The guard hoped things would stay this way. Of course they wouldn't. The city was quiet, completely unaware of what was about to happen. But far from the quiet streets, a group of men were gathered in the dark. Looking over a map, their leader announced that their plan was happening tonight. Their goal was insane. They were planning to take out the emperor and bring down the entire empire. He clenched his fist, declaring this was the only way to get their kingdom back. His men listened, their faces serious. Among them was Logan McLean. Every single one of them was ready to follow their orders. The leader then looked directly at Logan. He told him that his part in all of this was the most important one. The leader's eyes were fixed on Logan McLean. He told Logan that he had to protect the secret text at all costs. Logan just nodded, understanding the weight of his task. He confirmed that he was aware of what he needed to do. With their orders given, the soldiers began to move. As they walked, one of the other soldiers came up beside him. The guy commented that Logan sure seemed patriotic. He clarified that he was talking about the secret text, but Logan didn't seem interested in small talk. His mind was somewhere else entirely. The soldier reminded him that countless people had been sacrificed for that book. Possessing it made you the Empire's #1 target. The guy continued, saying Logan was taking a huge risk to protect it. But Logan just kept walking, his expression completely blank. This dude just wouldn't shut up, going on about how Logan's fluency in the ancient tongue got him the job, and calling him a patriot for doing it without complaint. That's when Logan finally turned to face him. Logan cut him off, telling him to stop. He warned the soldier that he was indirectly insulting their fallen comrades. The poor guy froze, sweating nervously. He turned away, his voice low. He explained that this had nothing to do with patriotism. It was because in his past, he was a complete good-for-nothing. And just like that, his mind snapped back to a different time. He was on the ground, completely defeated. His younger brother Ronian stood over him with a wooden sword. Someone in the crowd gasped, shocked that Logan had actually lost. The crowd started whispering. They pointed out that Ronian had only been training for 3 years and was already a natural-born genius. Logan, on the other hand, had been training for 10 years. The difference was just pathetic. People openly called him a fool, questioning how he could be the oldest son. With an heir like him, the family's future looked bleak. But the memory that really haunted him wasn't the defeat. It was what he did next. He remembered the paralysis poison, the moment he threw away everything. His father's enraged voice echoed in his mind. He screamed at Logan, asking if he'd lost his mind for poisoning his own brother. He remembered the absolute terror in his father's voice, the fear that Ronian might not recover from the damage. The memory of his father's face twisted in pure agony and rage. That was the image he could never forget. His father's words echoed in his head. He'd been told to get out, that he was no longer his son. For the sin of harming his own brother, he was kicked out of the family. He left everything behind and became a mercenary. It took 10 long years of fighting and surviving on his own for him to finally understand just how terrible he'd been. But by the time he realized it, it was already too late. Suddenly, he heard whispers from the crowd around him. They were talking about a public hanging that was scheduled for that day. And then he heard the name of the prisoner. It was McLean. This was the memory of his brother's execution. The people in the crowd were gossiping. They said the prisoner was an aura user who fought for the kingdom on the front lines, only to be abandoned by the royal family when they fled. In his final moments, Ronian screamed, trying to tell someone something important. But all Logan could do was watch. His eyes shot open in horror as the blade fell. The executioner then roared to the crowd, declaring that this was the fate of any fool who dared to stand against the Empire. And disgustingly, the crowd roared in approval. Tears streamed down Logan's face. He swore he would get revenge on the Empire. He'd spent years fighting in the trenches, a mercenary haunted by his past. But that life was about to end. An Imperial soldier spotted him. They were after a secret text he was protecting. With a whole squad on his tail, Logan just ran. He was outnumbered, cornered, and running on fumes. He bolted for the nearest door, looking for any way out. But they were right on his tail, cutting off his only exit. He knew he was trapped. The time for running was over. The first soldier charged in, roaring for the rebel's head. Logan met the soldier's blade head-on, sparks flying from the impact. He gritted his teeth, pouring every ounce of strength into his arms. The soldier stumbled back, shocked by Logan's raw power. Before he could even finish his curse, Logan's blade sliced across his chest. He finished the first guy just as the next soldier screamed in fury. This one came at him from above, swinging his sword down with full force. But Logan was faster. He ducked right under the blow, getting inside the soldier's guard. The soldier's wild swing left him completely exposed. It was the only opening Logan needed. With one man down, another soldier immediately took his place, his face twisted in a snarl. But Logan wasn't just defending himself. He was on the attack, determined to take down every last one of these Empire scumbags. Suddenly, more soldiers rushed in, their boots stomping on the wooden floor as they completely surrounded him. They started shouting, accusing him of stealing the Empire's treasure. They pointed their blades at him, demanding he surrender and hand over something called the secret text. He was trapped. Outnumbered and exhausted, Logan looked at the men surrounding him. For a second, he wondered if this was really how he was going to die. But then a small, grim smile appeared on his face. He wasn't going to make it easy for them. He looked over his shoulder at the soldiers and told them they had left him with no other choice. In his hand was a small, glowing blue orb. He made it clear that if he was going down, he was taking everyone with him. Then he clenched his fist, and the orb's light flared into a violent, angry red. With a grim smile, he decided to end it all on his own terms. The soldiers could only stare in disbelief. They had made a fatal mistake. A massive explosion tore through the entire building. And just like that, Logan's miserable life was over. Floating in the darkness, he thought about his life. It was filled with regrets. His only comfort was knowing he'd managed to hurt the Empire on his way out. But that wasn't what truly bothered him. His biggest regret, the one that followed him even after death, was that he never begged for forgiveness. He just hoped that if he met his family in the afterlife, he'd finally get the chance to tell them he was sorry. But instead of the afterlife, he was suddenly gasping for air. Splitting headache shot through his skull. He was alive. Somehow he was actually alive. He wondered how he could feel pain. He was supposed to be dead. Suddenly, a voice cut through the haze, asking if he was all right. Logan stared at the man. He knew that face. The man introduced himself as Rick, his main servant, and asked again how he felt. But that didn't make any sense. Logan remembered Rick dying 30 years ago. He demanded to know how he was still alive. The poor guy looked absolutely terrified by the question. He started screaming for a doctor, completely convinced that his master had gone crazy from a head injury. As his servants rushed out in a panic, Logan was left alone. He looked down at his own hands and the impossible truth started to sink in. He stumbled to a window and looked outside. In the courtyard below, knights were sparring, training just like any other day. He saw the symbol on their shields and on the castle banners. It was the McLean family crest. His family's crest. This had to be a dream. There was no other explanation for it. Just then the door creaked open. A young man stepped in and called him brother. Logan froze. That voice. He knew that voice. It couldn't be. It was Ronian. He looked up and saw him. His younger brother Ronian stood there, looking just as he did all those years ago. Logan's mind was racing. He wasn't just in the past. He clenched his fist. He remembered this day. He remembered this exact moment. This was it. This was the moment his brother came to visit him after the duel. The moment everything went wrong. In his memory, he saw himself throw a pillow right at Ronian's face, screaming at him to get out. But this bastard didn't stop there. He hurled a vicious insult at his own brother, calling him the son of a concubine. Ronian had always followed him around, no matter how badly he was treated, but after that day, he never came to see him again. The memory faded, and Logan heard his brother's voice calling his name, full of worry. A servant quickly stepped in, trying to send Ronian away and telling him that the young master needed his rest. But this time, Logan spoke up from the bed. He told the servant to stop and called out to Ronian, telling him it was okay to come closer. Instead of the angry scowl from his memory, he gave his brother a small, gentle smile. This time, things would be different. Ronian just stared, a little surprised by his brother's gentle tone. The servant Rick was completely lost. This was not the Logan he knew. Logan sat up and started apologizing, saying he should have been more careful. But Ronian just told him it was okay, that he didn't need to keep saying sorry. But Logan kept going, telling his brother that he was the one who did something wrong. He tried to apologize one more time, but then he just froze, grabbing his head like he was in terrible pain. Ronian called out his name, completely panicked. But Logan was lost in the memory. He remembered how this kind, gentle person in front of him was sent to the front lines by the kingdom and was executed. The memories were too much. Logan fell to his knees. He grabbed his brother's shoulders, his hands shaking. All he could do was apologize over and over again. Tears streamed down his face. He was completely overwhelmed by regret. Then he just pulled his brother into a hug. Ronian was totally stunned, asking why he was crying. Ronian didn't understand what was happening. His brother had never acted like this before. His shock slowly turned into a quiet concern. For the first time in a very, very long time, the two brothers just held each other. With a smile, Ronian told his brother he'd come visit again soon. He seemed genuinely happy, patting Logan's shoulder as he left. Logan just calmly waved and told him to go get some rest. But the moment the door closed, his smile vanished. He stood there alone trying to make sense of it all. He had to be sure this wasn't just a dream. If this was real, if he was truly back in the past, then he had to change everything. He wouldn't let his family fall again. Suddenly, his thoughts were cut short by a gasp from behind him. Someone was calling his name. He turned around to see a maid, bowing deeply and apologizing over and Logan was completely lost. He had no idea what she was talking about. That's when his servant Rick walked in laughing. He explained that the maid Mary must have just gotten the rooms confused, and it all came rushing back to him. He suddenly remembered how awful he used to be to the staff. He quickly told them it was fine and that she hadn't done anything wrong. Then he asked Rick to bring him a pen and some paper. Of course, this just made them look even more terrified. They thought he was about to write up some official punishment for her. Logan had to quickly tell them to just get the supplies and send her away. A moment later, Rick left the pen and paper on his desk. Logan thanked him and told him to make sure no one else came into his room. Rick just stood there, completely stunned. Apparently, this was the first time Logan had ever thanked him for anything. But Rick just kept fussing over him, asking if he was sure he was all right, wondering if his head still hurt. Finally, Logan just snapped and yelled at him to get out. Hilariously, this seemed to make Rick feel much better, who happily agreed. The servant told him to get some rest and finally left the room. Logan let out a frustrated sigh. He figured Rick probably thought he was back to normal now that he was yelling again. He knew he just had to be patient. This was the price for how he used to be. He sat down at his desk, clenching his fists. The time for regret was over. He knew exactly what he had to do first. He needed to write down everything he could remember about what was going to happen. The most important event was the war against the Empire 10 years from now. A disaster that would destroy not only his family but the entire kingdom. He picked up the quill, his eyes filled with resolve. That was his goal, to change everything. The war with the Empire was the big one, but he knew there was a closer threat. A war between the fiefdoms just 1 year away. He remembered it all too well. The fighting started without warning and it almost wiped them out completely. That conflict was what sent the McLean family into a downward spiral they never recovered from. That was the first thing he had to prevent. With his mind made up, he knew exactly who he needed to talk to. He made his way to his father's study. He knocked on the heavy doors. Inside, a guard addressed the man standing by the window, the patriarch of the McLean family. The guard announced that the first young master, Logan, was here to see him. The patriarch turned from the window, looking unimpressed. He was clearly surprised to hear Logan's name, probably wondering what kind of trouble his son was about to cause now. Logan walked through the halls, his steps echoing on the marble floor. He was on a mission. Suddenly, the servants in the hall started freaking out. Everyone tensed up, trying to make themselves invisible. And it all came rushing back to him. He suddenly remembered how awful he used to be to the staff. That's when one of the maids carrying a huge pile of laundry lost her balance. She tripped and fell, spilling everything right at his feet. The poor woman looked absolutely terrified. She was convinced she was done for, that falling in front of the young master was a death sentence. But then Logan did something no one expected. He offered her his hand. The maid took his hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked more relieved than anything else. He tried to give her a reassuring smile and told her it was no big deal. The problem was, his smile looked absolutely terrifying. He sighed, realizing that a person changing overnight was probably just strange. He figured it would take time for everyone to adjust to the new him. He just had to be patient and show them little by little that he was different now. Then he tried another smile. He started to wonder if his smile was just awkward, but he quickly pushed that thought away. With that settled, he made his way to his father's study. A guard announced his arrival, telling the patriarch that the first young master was here to see him. Logan stood there looking nervous. This was the first real test he had to face his father. He remembered the words that haunted him for years. The moment his father told him he was no longer his child. In his past life, Logan had resented him for it, thinking his father was just a cold-hearted man who gave up on him. But now, looking back, he saw it completely differently. He clenched his fist, realizing just how heartbroken his father must have been to say something like that to his own son. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside, put on a calm expression, trying to look as composed as possible. He formally greeted his father, announcing his presence. The patriarch slowly turned around to face him. His father looked at him from across the room and simply said his name. He looked his father in the eye, ready to finally apologize for everything he'd done. But before he could even get the words out, his father cut him off, simply saying that he looked better than expected. He wasn't interested in apologies. He just got straight to the point and asked Logan what he wanted. Logan was taken aback by how cold he was. But then he remembered for him 20 years had passed. For his father, he was the same disappointment he'd been just yesterday. So he made his request. He asked for permission to go into isolated training on the family's land. The request clearly caught his father off guard. In his mind, the plan was simple. To survive the coming war, they needed to strengthen their army from the knights to the soldiers and develop better weapons. But to do any of that, he needed one thing above all else. Money. And unfortunately, the McLean family was famous for one thing, being completely broke. They had no money to fund any of his plans. But Logan had a plan. He knew there was one way to get a huge amount of money all at once. An incident that was going to happen in just 3 months. If he played it right, he could earn a whole year's worth of the family budget in a single go. To pull it off, he needed to get stronger and earn some respect. But his father wasn't convinced. He flat out asked if Logan was just trying to run away because he was ashamed of losing to his little brother. Logan denied it immediately. He explained that he'd finally realized how much he'd been lacking and was trying to get his act together. His father's voice cut in, scoffing as if a lack of effort was the only problem. The patriarch stared at him, his expression hard. He told Logan he clearly still hadn't come to his senses. That's when Logan understood. His father wasn't going to trust him that easily. He tried a different approach, finally admitting that his own terrible behavior over the years had been a huge problem. But his father just looked tired. He told Logan he'd heard him say things like that so many times before. With that, he turned his back and told him to leave. The conversation was over. As a final parting shot, he told Logan the real issue. Instead of ever acknowledging his own shortcomings, he just took his anger out on other people. Logan looked his father straight in the eye. He admitted that he'd been foolish and immature, and that this training was his way of trying to fix that. He put his hand on his chest and begged his father to please give him this one chance. The patriarch was quiet for a moment. He could see it in his son's eyes. This time, it didn't feel like just another empty promise. Logan just stood there waiting for the answer. Finally, his father broke the silence and asked how long he planned to be in training. Logan told him he was thinking around 3 months. His father scoffed, asking if 3 months was really enough time to catch up to Ronian. But Logan explained that this wasn't about beating his brother anymore. Logan simply said he wanted to do the best he could in the time he had. That was the answer his father needed. He could see his son had truly changed. He told him he would allow it. A huge smile spread across Logan's face. He thanked his father, relieved that he'd finally gotten through to him. Just as Logan was about to leave, his father called out to him one last time. He warned Logan that since it was still spring, the family burial grounds would be too cold for sleeping outside. He told his son to take care of himself and stay warm. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. Logan just smiled and told his father he would. A few days later, he was ready to begin. He made it to the McLean family's private burial grounds. It was a huge, sprawling forest. This was the perfect spot. Only immediate family members were allowed here, so he knew no one would bother him. And that was exactly what he needed, because the training he was about to do couldn't be seen by anyone. He finally found what he was looking for. This was the Divine Sword Secrets. In his previous life, he'd memorized the entire thing before burning it, just to keep it out of the Empire's hands. The original was a masterpiece, a legendary book embroidered with a golden hawk. It held all the secrets of an ancient hero, the one who took down the evil dragon that once ruled the entire world. He'd rewritten the whole thing from memory, using a secret code so no one else could ever read it. Our boy was pretty proud of himself. He knew if he could master these techniques, even the Empire's strongest mages and knights wouldn't be a problem. In his past life, it was too late for him. But now he actually had a chance. The whole thing was based on one simple idea, using your own life force called force to change your body from the inside out. He clenched his fist, ready to begin. The first step was to focus all his force into his heart and create a core. He knew his past self would have given up at this stage, but this time was different. He could feel it immediately. After regressing, his force was on a completely different level. He figured it would only take 3 days to finish the training, but then something started happening. His eyes shot open. Somehow the core was already forming on its own. This wasn't supposed to be possible. An insane amount of energy burst from his chest, so dense it almost looked solid. But instead of hurting him, his body soaked up the power instantly. It felt incredible. He realized that if the secret book was right, he could finally test his new strength. He reached for his sword. With a single stomp, the ground cracked beneath his feet. This changed everything. He gripped his sword, his eyes burning with focus. With a single swing, he unleashed a wave of energy that tore through the clearing. A huge grin spread across his face. He could feel it in every part of his body, his senses, his strength, everything had changed. It was like he was born to use a sword. He still had no idea how the force core had formed so quickly, but honestly, he wasn't about to question it. All he knew was that if he was this strong now in 3 months, he'd be on a whole other level. That thought was all the motivation he needed. He wasn't stopping now. So he kept training, pushing himself harder and harder. The sun started to set, but he didn't even notice. He just kept going long after darkness fell. The next morning, he was right back at it. He stood before a massive tree, thinking about the 10 techniques from the Book of Secrets. One of them was the legendary time-space slash. But with his single 1-star core, he knew he was nowhere near that level yet. For now, there was only one move he could possibly pull off. The very first technique. He poured every bit of energy he had into the sword. He was determined to master it no matter what it took. He focused, ready to unleash the slashing wave. With everything he had, he swung his blade. A wave of pure energy shot out, tearing through the air in front of him. The single attack left him completely drained, gasping for... He dropped to one knee using his sword to stay upright, and then he just started to laugh. He looked up at the tree and saw the massive gash he'd carved into it. It worked. It actually worked. The relief and excitement were too much. He just fell back and laughed, completely overjoyed. He couldn't believe it. This kind of power was way beyond what any beginner should be able to do. Sure, it completely wiped him out after just one hit, but having a secret weapon like this was a huge advantage. With this, he felt like he'd finally achieved his training goals. It was time to go report his results to his father. Although he figured he should probably wash up first before going to see him. When Logan got to his father's office, he was stopped by a knight at the door. The man told him flat out that the patriarch couldn't see him. This clown just stood there with a smug grin, clearly enjoying his little power trip. Logan didn't back down. He asked why, wondering if his father was sick. The knight just waved a hand and explained that according to family law, even direct relatives needed an appointment to see the patriarch. He condescendingly asked if Logan had forgotten. Logan was confused. He pointed out that those rules were ancient, and he'd met his father this exact way just 3 months ago. But the knight just said the previous guard must have been slacking. That's when it hit Logan. This was new. This never happened in his original life. Suddenly, his ears perked up. He could hear a faint noise coming from inside the mansion, realizing his training had amplified his senses. He focused and could make out 2 guards talking. They were complaining about him, which confirmed his suspicion that something was definitely wrong here. Guards were laughing their heads off. They called him a coward who ran away after losing to his little brother, confident that he wouldn't dare make a sound. It all clicked for Logan. His reputation had completely hit rock bottom. Even his own family's knights treated him like a joke. The guard just waved him off, telling him to come back when he had an appointment. He thought to himself that this was just way too much trouble. His original plan was to slowly show everyone he'd changed and fix his reputation over time. But this situation was forcing his hand. He looked the knight dead in the eye and asked for his name. The knight looked completely confused by the question. He told Logan his name was Domian. Logan took a breath, repeating the name in his mind. Domian, he wasn't going to forget it. Then he laid it all out. He told Domian he'd used a dead family rule just to stop him from seeing his own father. And on top of that, he'd been completely disrespectful the entire time. The servant standing behind Logan looked on, his face full of worry. He could tell this was about to get ugly. Domian just stood there completely confused. He had no idea what was happening. Logan's voice boomed through the hall. The entire hallway went silent. The other guards couldn't believe what they were hearing. Logan just smiled, enjoying the silence. He taunted the knight, asking if he was too scared to answer. The poor servant behind him looked like he was about to faint. But Logan kept piling it on, mocking Domian for cowering before a supposed coward. He finished by saying all the older knights must be past their prime. Domian was absolutely furious, clenching his fists. That's when a deep voice came from inside the study. It gave a simple, powerful command, do it. The knight's knuckles went white as he crushed his glove in his hand. He was shaking with anger. He accepted the duel. The knight roared, his face twisted with rage. But Logan just stood there with a smug little grin. He had gotten exactly what he wanted. So they moved to the training hall to get ready for the fight. Logan and the knight Domian faced each other. They were using wooden swords, but this was definitely not a friendly match. The other knights watching couldn't believe what was happening. They were all whispering that the young master was about to get absolutely destroyed. They remembered how he got beaten by his brother and hid for 3 months. They were even starting to bet on how long the coward would last. One guy bet he wouldn't even last 10 minutes and another upped it, saying he wouldn't last 5. The thing is, with his new senses, Logan could hear every single word. He just thought to himself, so no one expects me to win, huh? Even his opponent was looking down on him. The knight sarcastically told the young master to be careful not to get hurt. This dude was absolutely furious. He was clearly taking this duel personally. But Logan just smirked. He could see right through this guy. The knight acted tough but didn't have the insides to truly disrespect a member of the family in front of everyone. To Logan, this guy was all bark and no bite. The servants watching from the side were in total shock. They couldn't believe the young master was actually going through with this. One of them, a guy named Rick, was so scared he looked like he'd stopped breathing. In his mind, this was a complete disaster. With that, Logan and the knight walked to the center of the training hall. An announcer stepped forward, looking nervous as hell. He officially declared the start of the duel between Logan McLean and Sir Dominion. Quickly added that for safety, they would only be using wooden weapons. He took a deep breath, ready to give the signal. Logan just gave a simple nod. He was ready. The poor announcer, though, was sweating bullets. He was thinking this was a terrible idea, but the young master had been so stubborn that he had no choice but to let it happen. The announcer was thinking about how dangerous this really was. Even with wooden swords, a knight using force could easily take someone out. He desperately pleaded with Sir Dominion to go easy on him, then dropped his hand and yelled for the duel to start. And just like that, the fight was on. Logan and Sir Dominion stood across from each other in the training yard. Neither of them made a move, they just stood there sizing each other up. But then Sir Dominion started gathering his energy. You could see the power building around his feet. A dark red aura exploded from his body. This guy was getting serious. The other knights watching from the sidelines just laughed. They couldn't believe he was actually using force against a normal person. The servants, though, were absolutely terrified. They knew this was basically cheating. If Logan got hit by that, it would be over. But Logan was completely unimpressed. To anyone else, that massive aura might have looked scared. But our boy knew better. All that leaking energy just meant the knight was clumsy and couldn't control his own force. So Logan decided to poke the bear. He casually asked the knight if something had upset him, which only made Dominion angrier. Logan's words had clearly hit a nerve. The insult about being past his prime echoed in the knight's mind as his grip tightened on the sword. And there was a reason that insult worked so well. Turns out, at 40 years old, Dominion was the worst in the entire Knight's Order. He'd already decided to retire. He was just going through the motions every day, basically waiting for his career to be over. Knowing all this, Logan twisted the knife. With a smug grin, he said he guessed all the older knights were past their prime now. That was the last straw. The knight's face contorted with pure fury. He couldn't believe the disrespect. The knight roars and charges forward, his entire body glowing with red energy. He's putting everything he has into this first strike. The servant and the other knights are freaking out. They're screaming for someone to stop the fight, convinced that Logan is about to be wiped out. The knight's sword slams into the ground, kicking up dust. To him, this is his last stand. He's already decided to retire anyway. He roars that he's going to end this with his secret technique, leaping into the air for a final, powerful blow. But Logan just watches him completely unfazed. He doesn't even flinch. Just as the knight's sword is about to land, Logan sidesteps and swings his own wooden blade. He smacks it right against the side of Dominion's leg. The knight's face twists in agony. He lets out a pained grunt. His grip loosens and the wooden sword falls from his hand, clattering to the ground. The duel was over. Logan stood over the defeated knight, a strange heat radiating from his body. The duel was over, but he wasn't finished. He looked down at the man on the ground and mocked him for calling himself a knight. He asked if that weak display was really the best he had to offer. The other guards who had been laughing just moments ago were completely silent. Their jaws were on the floor. Honestly, everyone watching was in a state of pure disbelief. No one could process what had just happened. Sir Dominion just knelt there, completely broken. He hadn't stood a chance. The guards started whispering to each other, completely stunned. One of them admitted he couldn't even see Logan move. That's when it clicked for them. The young master wasn't just skilled, he was a force user. Unfazed by their shock, Logan simply called for the referee to make it official. The referee finally snapped out of his shock and hurried over to make the official call. But Logan wasn't finished. With a cocky grin, he said he wanted to give Sir Dominion another chance. The referee turned to the poor guy, who was still being helped up from the ground. The other knights were just completely stunned. One of them was sweating, trying to understand what on earth was going on. Sir Dominion's mind was racing. He couldn't accept it. Was he really weaker than this kid? As if to answer him, a red aura flared to life around Logan's hand. The knight just screamed, refusing to believe this was real. But someone watching noticed the truth. Logan was pushing himself way too hard. This power was causing his body to overheat. Logan didn't even hesitate. He drove his foot straight into the knight's chest, shattering the wooden sword on impact. The blow sent Sir Dominion flying back, spitting blood. Our boy just stood there, looking down at the man he'd just taken apart. He clicked his tongue, annoyed. He'd even offered the guy a second chance. He figured it was about time for this knight to just give up. And honestly, the poor guy looked completely broken. The humiliation was written all over his face. Finally, Sir Dominion struggled to get to his knees, looking up at the young master. He opened his mouth to admit his defeat, but the words wouldn't come out. But before the knight could even finish his sentence, Logan slammed the hilt of his sword right into the man's face. He told the knight he'd shown more than enough mercy. This wasn't a duel anymore. This was a lesson. His eyes were cold. He wasn't done yet. He raised the broken sword and just started wailing on him. The knight could only scream, begging him to stop. The servants and guards watching were horrified. They couldn't believe how cruel this was, wondering if someone should step in and stop him. The other knights were just stunned. They couldn't understand how this was the same young master from 3 months ago. Not only had his force awakened, but his sword skills were completely different. It was like he'd been a swordsman for decades. They had no idea how right they were. When it was all over, Logan just stood there, looking down at the knight he'd completely broken. The poor guy officiating the duel stammered, clearly shaken by what he'd just seen. He announced that the winner was Logan McLean, but our boy didn't even crack a smile. This wasn't about winning, it was about sending a message. A little while later, Logan was called into a quiet study. A voice from across the room told him that his performance was impressive. It was his father. He asked Logan how he'd awakened his force, wanting to know what happened during his training. Logan realized his father must have been watching the entire duel from his window. He gave his father a prepared answer. He explained that he'd let go of his greed, and as he trained with a clear mind, he suddenly felt the force fill him up. Of course, that was a lie. The truth was much darker. In his past life, Logan only became a force user after he had given up everything to avenge his family. His father admitted that he himself didn't awaken his own force until he was 40. He looked at his son and said that Logan had definitely changed, but his tone immediately hardened. He asked why Logan's first action after gaining this new power was to go and beat up one of their own knights. Logan didn't back down. He told his father that the knight deserved it and pointed out that he must have heard the whole story from the other soldiers. His father yelled back that he did hear everything. But even so, he demanded to know if Logan really needed to take it that far. Logan looked him dead in the eye and said yes, it was necessary. His father was stunned into silence for a second, clearly not expecting such a firm answer. Logan explained that the knight wasn't just being rude. He was openly disrespecting the Lord's own son and making a joke of him. If he had let that slide, it would have been like a poison, destroying the family's discipline from the inside. Logan continued, explaining that hierarchy is what holds an organization together. And if that order is broken, the entire thing crumbles. He told his father about what he learned after 10 years as a mercenary. When dealing with men with weapons, you have to put them in their place in one strike. The duel was a lesson for all the other knights. His father listened, and after a moment he actually agreed. He admitted that Domian was mostly at fault for forgetting his duty and trying to fool Logan. But he warned Logan that it was a massive gamble and told him to cool it for a while. Logan was stunned. He couldn't believe his father was letting him off so easily. His dad noticed his surprise and jokingly asked if he'd prefer a punishment. Logan immediately threw his hands up and said definitely no. His father's face turned serious again. He made it clear that he wasn't approving of what Logan did. He ordered him not to pull a stunt like that again without permission, reminding him that he hadn't even officially received his rank yet. Logan just nodded and agreed to keep it in mind. Just as Logan thought the conversation was over, his father told him there was something else he needed to know. Logan looked up, wondering what it could possibly be. His father announced that his fiancée, Reena, would be visiting soon. The news hit Logan like a ton of bricks. But after a moment, he just calmly acknowledged it. He knew she was coming eventually. An image of Reena from his past life flashed through his mind. But this Logan wasn't thinking about love. A huge, greedy grin spread across his face. To him, she was a walking business opportunity, a total cash cow. And just like that, Princess Reena of the Wolves family arrived at the McLean estate. His mind was already racing, thinking about the products he could sell and the money he could make. A woman in a beautiful gown stepped into the hall. The maids gasped her beauty was stunning. Even the guards were blushing, thinking about how lucky Logan was. Reena greeted Lord McLean, saying it had been too long. This was young Lady Reena of the Wolves family. She smiled politely, asking if he'd been well. Logan's father laughed, complimenting her on how much she'd grown. Everyone in the hall was completely captivated. They couldn't believe how beautiful she was. But for the McLean family, this wasn't just a friendly visit. Logan, his father, and his mother stood together, watching with serious expressions. Something big was about to happen. But while everyone else was starstruck, Logan looked completely serious. The guards were confused. He was supposed to be the happiest guy in the room, but he wasn't smiling at all. That's when Reena announced that she would read a letter entrusted to her by her father, the Count. The Count, formal letter addressed to Logan's father. The letter just went on and on. The guards were sweating bullets, clearly bored out of their minds. Finally, she reached the main point. She announced that due to unavoidable circumstances, her family was requesting to break off the arranged marriage. And with that, the message was delivered. Heavy silence fell over the entire hall. The McLean family just stood at the top of the stairs, processing the news. But Logan knew exactly what the flowery language was hiding. This wasn't a polite request to end the engagement. He could practically hear Reena's father, Chiron Wolves, mocking his own dad. He was probably thinking that Patrick McLean was a failure, stuck as a simple knight for over 2 decades without ever becoming an aura user. And on top of that, he was probably complaining that Logan himself was the worst. basically asking why his powerful family should ever lower their standards for the McLeans. The real message was simple: they were done with them. It was a total humiliation. And that's when Logan's father, Baron McLean, finally snapped. He roared, demanding to know if the House of Wolves was trying to humiliate them. The man was shaking with absolute rage. The guards looked on, completely terrified by the sudden tension in the hall. That's when Reena quickly spoke up, telling the Baron that wasn't their intention at all. She claimed she came personally just to clear up any misunderstandings. With a tear in her eye, Reena said she still had vivid memories of her time there as a child. She remembered the beautiful moments she shared with Logan. She called those memories precious and said she had no wish to abandon them. But she explained she was bound to her family and had no choice but to follow their directions. That's why she wanted to come and apologize in person. The maids watching were completely taken by her speech. They thought her heart was as beautiful as her face. Logan, on the other hand, was not impressed. He looked completely disgusted, barely holding back a curse. That's when a woman with a stern look on her face cut in. She asked Reena directly what the real reason for all this was. She wanted to hear about the unavoidable circumstances that were mentioned in the letter. Reena just stood there looking down. She couldn't give them an answer. Logan recognized the woman who spoke. It was Marion Kairos, his stepmother and Ronian's biological mother. He knew she saw him as an enemy because of the succession. But it seemed like protecting the family's honor was a completely different story. Reena apologized, saying she didn't know the reason herself. Marion pushed back, asking how she could be so clueless about her own marriage. She explained that her father doesn't discuss important family matters with her. To the McLeans, this just meant she was here to break the engagement for no reason at all. Marion's face twisted with anger. She asked if that was really how they were supposed to take it. That's when Reena cut in, announcing that the Wolves family intended to pay them in return. She stated they would pay 3 million gold as compensation for breaking the engagement. The McLeans' financial manager, Dwayne Filsner, completely lost it. He screamed out the number, absolutely stunned. For a family drowning in debt, 3 million gold was an unbelievable fortune. Logan couldn't care less about the engagement. All he saw were dollar signs. He was already scheming about how to get his hands on that 3 million gold. But Logan's father had a very different reaction. Baron McLean absolutely exploded with rage. To him, the offer of money was a slap in the face to his family's honor. His aura flared up so intensely that it sent the visiting knights stumbling backward. They were completely overwhelmed by his strength. Reena's personal guard immediately jumped in front of her, shielding her from the pressure. The knight, who called himself Rockfern, pleaded with the Baron to calm down so they could continue their conversation. The Baron's anger faded, replaced by a cold stare. He sized the knight up, noting that he was a high-ranking knight just like him. He even sounded impressed by the kid's skill. But then came the threat. The Baron suggested that injuring the Wolves family's rising star might be a fair price for the insult to his family's honor. Rockfern started sweating. He was completely outmatched and couldn't even look up. The pressure was just too much. Rockfern, still sweating, tried to talk his way out of it. He told the Baron that his own patriarch had called Lord McLean a man of honor, someone who wouldn't harm a junior knight or a young princess. He explained that the money wasn't meant to buy their honor. It was just a sincere attempt to maintain the friendship between their families, despite everything. And just like that, the Baron realized he was trapped. If he pressed any further, he'd look like a dishonorable bully. The Wolves family had sent these kids specifically to put him in this corner. He let out a breath, his anger simmering down. He decided to play along, stating that a visitor is a visitor, no matter how unwelcome. Reena let out a quiet sigh of relief. The Baron announced that the House of McLean doesn't harm its guests. The immediate danger was over. But he wasn't just going to roll over. He made it clear that they would not be accepting the Wolves' one-sided offer. Instead of money, he had only one request. In exchange for breaking the engagement, Reena Wolves had to personally and courteously apologize to his son. He refused any other form of payment. The McLean guards standing by were completely blown away. They looked at their lord with total admiration. To them, this was what true nobility looked like. But just as the Baron finished his grand, honorable speech, a hand shot up. It was Logan. He stepped forward and said that as the person actually involved in this, he had a request of his own. With a huge, greedy grin, he basically told his father he was crazy. He insisted they had to take the money, pointing out that 3 million gold was their entire budget for a year. His stepmother looked on, completely stunned. Logan wasn't done, though. He reminded everyone that half their funding came from her family, and they'd go bankrupt the second that support was gone. He looked dead serious. Honor was a luxury they couldn't afford. He declared that they had to take the 3 million no matter what. Turning to his father, Logan formally announced that he would accept the terms of the Wolves' apology. The Baron was speechless. And then the rage hit. His father's eyes practically glowed red. He roared at Logan, demanding to know if he was really going to make him go back on his word in front of everyone. The pressure was insane. Logan started sweating, realizing just how intimidating a high-ranking knight could be, even without using any aura. But Logan braced himself. He knew this pressure was nothing compared to what was coming. If he couldn't even handle his own father, he'd never survive the future. His father wasn't backing down, though. He yelled that House McLean wasn't so poor that they had to abandon their honor just for money. Logan took a deep breath, ready to drop a truth bomb, and then he just screamed it. He told his father that yes, they absolutely were that poor. He laid out the ugly truth for everyone to hear. House McLean owed the bank 1 million gold right now. He kept going, shouting that the interest alone was 150,000 gold every single. He pointed out that without his stepmother's family supporting them, they would have been bankrupt ages ago. His father and stepmother could only listen, stunned. Our boy finished his rant by calling them the greatest beggar family in the entire kingdom. He screamed that they were completely, utterly broke. Logan held his tongue. He knew exactly what he wanted to say, but in a formal meeting like this, he had to play it cool. His voice echoed through the hall as he made his case. He claimed the only reason they had to accept the money was for the sake of their honor. His father, Lord McLean, wasn't having it. He asked if Logan was seriously suggesting he go back on his word just for the sake of honor. Logan calmly explained the situation. He reminded his father that House Wolves had a higher rank than them, and their leader was a powerful Margrave. He kept going, pointing out that while the Wolves family was powerful, they weren't their masters. The onlookers listened, shocked. Logan argued that if they just accepted an apology without compensation, it would look like they were bowing down to them. That's when his fiancée, Reena, spoke up. She insisted that her family wasn't being unreasonable. Logan immediately cut her off. He scoffed at her family's supposed respect for their honor, pointing out how ridiculous it was for them to break an engagement one-sidedly and then talk about being rational. He stared them down, his expression making it clear he wasn't going to be pushed around. Logan remembered this moment from his past life. Back then, he actually believed Reena was genuinely sad about their engagement ending. He recalled meeting her in a private room. She thanked him for coming, acting like she just wanted to talk. She told him that even though they had to break up, she wanted to create one last memory with him. And the old Logan, like a complete fool, fell for it. He told her his life was ruined anyway, and that risking it all to run away with her might be the better choice. He begged her to come with him that night, but while he was pouring his heart out, she was pulling a hidden dagger from her dress. He froze mid-sentence, his eyes wide with shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Without a word, she threw the dagger straight at his throat. But this time he was ready. In his memory, he drew his sword and deflected the blade. The flash of steel brought him back to the present, a sharp reminder of who he was really dealing with. In his memory, after he blocked the dagger, Reena dropped the act completely. She mocked him, telling him to learn his place and get lost. She even thanked him for making things easier for her. The old Logan was completely lost. He couldn't understand what was happening and asked her what she meant. That's when she started her performance. She tore her own dress and started backing away, acting terrified. She screamed for the guards, claiming Logan had suddenly attacked her. Of course, they burst in right on cue. The whole thing was a setup. She played the part of the helpless victim perfectly. And just like that, he was trapped. His family didn't believe his side of the story, and the McLeans were forced to apologize and pay a huge sum of money to the Wolves family. The memory brought him back to the present, his face twisting into a grim smile. That experience was why he could never trust women again. He was sure she was planning to pull the same kind of trick this time around. He thought about her plan to just break the engagement and walk away with all the benefits. Too bad for her. This time was going to be different. And just like that, Reena arrived. She stood in the grand hall looking up at Logan on the balcony. He stared back down at her, his mind clear. He knew exactly what she was capable of, and he wasn't about to let her play him for a fool again. At first, Logan's plan was simple. He figured if he slowly showed everyone he'd changed, he could convince them he was a different person. He thought that eventually, the whole family would change for the better. That's what he believed anyway. But his fight with Dominan made him realize just how wrong he was. His own soldiers turned a blind eye when he was being disrespected. And while he was away, rumors were completely destroying his name. He clenched his fists. He was done trying to be subtle. He decided his reputation didn't matter anymore. It was already in the gutter. The only thing that mattered now was saving his family. And that started with getting compensation from Princess Reena. And he was going to handle it his way, whether his family approved or not. Princess Reena stared, completely caught off guard. This was not how things were supposed to go. Suddenly, Logan's father exploded with rage. He screamed at Logan, furious that his son would dare defy his will and that he wouldn't accept a simple apology. The Baron just stared, confused by his son's calm defiance. But Logan didn't back down. He argued that if their family's honor could be fixed with empty words that would just disappear, then their honor wasn't worth much to begin with. Reena gritted her teeth. This was getting out of hand. So she changed her strategy. She announced that her family simply wished to obey the will of the Baron, the head of the McLean house. Then this woman turned the full pressure onto Logan's father, demanding to know what his choice would be. She was trying to split the family right then and there. Suddenly, Reena was the one sweating. Her little political game wasn't working anymore. Logan saw right through her act. This wasn't about saving face. She was terrified at the thought of having to pay 3 million gold. That's when Logan's father spoke up, his voice echoing through the hall. He announced that as the head of the McLean family, he was satisfied with a sincere apology. But then he added a condition that changed everything. He would leave it to Logan to decide if the apology was actually sincere. Logan's mother was furious. She couldn't believe her husband would put their son in such a position. The entire hall started whispering. Reena just stood there, completely stunned. The power had shifted entirely out of her hands. The Baron turned to his son, his expression serious. He told Logan to think very carefully about his next move. He warned him that if he accepted money for his dishonor now, he was setting a price on their family's honor for the future. The decision was his, and it would define them for years to come. The Baron stared at his son, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The choice was Logan's, and it would define their family's future. But Logan didn't hesitate. He apologized to his father but made it clear he wasn't caving. He was going to accept the compensation from the Wolves family. He stood there on the balcony, completely firm in his decision. This was about survival, not just honor. His mother, who had been furious just moments before, let out a little gasp of surprise. A smirk played on her lips. Reena, on the other hand, was absolutely livid. She couldn't believe he'd actually called her bluff. The Baron's voice was heavy with disappointment. He told Logan he thought he had changed. He turned his back on his son, saying that if anything, he'd changed for the worse. His father even blamed himself for not teaching him the true value of honor, but Logan's expression didn't change. He had made his choice. Logan stood his ground, his expression firm. He knew his father didn't understand, but every move he made was for the sake of the family. And just like that, the deal with the Wolves family was settled. The payment arrived. Logan finally had the funds he needed. It was an insane amount of money, 3 million gold. This was the first step to changing everything. He tried to keep a level head. The first priority was getting this money to the bank for safekeeping. That's when he heard a knock at his door. He figured it was just Rick and told the person to come on in. But the person who walked in wasn't who he was expecting. A man cleared his throat and formally greeted him as young master. Logan looked up surprised. It was Dwayne, the financial manager of the McLean family. Dwayne confirmed his identity with a polite smile. Logan knew exactly who this was, the financial manager, his father's most trusted man, which meant that big friendly smile definitely wasn't for him. He watched the man carefully, wondering what he was really after. Turns out Dwayne was going through it. He felt like he was facing the biggest challenge of his life, trying to run the entire estate with a budget that just kept shrinking. He was constantly being pulled in different directions. The servants needed winter supplies, but the soldiers needed new weapons, and there was never enough money for both. Honestly, he felt less like a financial manager and more like the boss of a bunch of beggars. If this wasn't his hometown, he would have quit a long time ago. But now, with that huge pile of cash Logan brought in, he saw his chance. This was his ticket to a few years of peace and quiet. And the best part, he figured his opponent was just a clueless, foolish kid. This was going to be easy. He was absolutely determined to get his hands on that 3 million gold. So he started with a big laugh, saying he just came to say hello and that Logan had really impressed him the day before. Logan was not buying it for a second, but the financial manager kept going, praising how Logan stood his ground and didn't back down when people were pushing him around. He called it an amazing performance, truly fitting for the heir of the McLean family. But inside, this clown was just thinking about how good his compliments must taste. He figured Logan had only ever done stupid things, so this was probably the first time anyone had ever praised him. The whole plan was to get Logan to open his heart and his wallet. Our boy just thought the whole thing was gross. Realizing his act wasn't working, Dwayne quickly cleared his throat. He switched tactics, explaining that in these hard times, 3 million gold was like rain in a desert for the family. Logan cut him off, making it crystal clear. This was his money, not the family's, and that one sentence sent the financial manager into a silent rage. He wasn't just saying it. He looked like he wanted to hoard every last coin for himself. Dwayne couldn't believe what he was hearing. He thought Logan was seriously planning to keep the entire fortune for himself. The poor guy was shaking, trying to tell himself to stay calm. He had to remember everything he'd been through. He remembered all the times he had to get on his knees and beg other nobles for help, just to be looked down on. He'd been humiliated, grabbed, and thrown aside. For him, groveling had become a normal part of the job. The weight of those memories was too much. Dwayne just broke down and started crying. Logan was genuinely confused. He had no idea the family's situation was that bad. The man just stood there, sobbing, completely overwhelmed by years of desperation. Finally pulling himself together, Dwayne laid out the ugly truth. He told Logan they owed a bank 3 million gold. The annual interest alone was completely burying them. But Logan didn't even flinch. Dwayne was stunned, asking if he somehow already knew about it. Logan just casually mentioned that since it was harvest time, they should have enough money to pay off the interest. Dwayne was completely lost. How could this kid know so much about their finances? Dwayne put on a nervous smile, trying to explain that running the estate was expensive, and their budget was always tight. He started to ask if Logan could help them out just a little, but our boy shut him down with a simple, firm no. The financial manager couldn't believe it. He stammered, asking why. He thought Logan was doing all of this for the good of the family. Logan just looked at him and said he was right. But the look on his face made it pretty clear he was playing a different game entirely. Dwayne looked relieved, thinking Logan was finally on the same page. But Logan immediately shut that down. He confirmed the money was for the family, but made it clear it wasn't for paying off their day-to-day expenses. He told the manager that he needed to think about the future. This was too much for Dwayne. He lost his temper and demanded Logan hand over the money, acting like he was just a kid who didn't know anything. Logan calmly asked him a question. If they used all this money just to pay off their current debts, what would really change for the family? Dwayne explained that it would give them a bigger budget and make running the estate easier for a few years. Basically, it would give them some breathing room. Logan pushed him further, asking what would happen after those few years were up. He answered his own question. They'd just end up in debt again because the family had no way to make real money. It was a cycle, and Logan told him he was here to break it. Logan laid it out plainly. He was going to use this money for his own plan. Dwayne was completely thrown. He couldn't believe this was the same kid who never cared about family business. Logan's expression was dead serious. He told Dwayne he had a favor to ask. Then he made an offer. If Dwayne did him this favor, he might be able to help out with some of the family's expenses. The manager was listening now. He asked what Logan needed. Logan's request was simple. He needed Dwayne to gather some mercenaries for him. Short time later, Logan was already packed and ready to go. A servant saw him and asked if he was really leaving again. The poor guy was confused. Logan had just gotten back from solitary training. He asked where he was going now and if it was to earn more money. Logan just focused on getting his armor on, ready for the road. The servant couldn't understand. He asked why Logan needed even more money when he already had so much. But Logan just shook his head. What he had wasn't nearly enough for what he was planning. The poor guy tried to reason with him, pointing out that his father would never let him leave, not with how tense things were in the castle. Logan already had a solution for that. He was just going to sneak out. The servant, of course, was speechless. He quickly shut him up. He explained that if he couldn't fix his reputation right now, he'd never be able to change anything for the family. The only way forward was to build his own power on the outside. And luckily, he knew exactly what was happening in the kingdom at this time. He knew because in his first life, this was the moment his family kicked him out, forcing him to wander the kingdom alone. He had someone specific in mind to recruit first. But his thoughts were cut off by the servant, who was now freaking out about a noble son running away from home. The servant was getting desperate, grabbing onto Logan and complaining about how stubborn he was being. He even threw himself on the floor, dramatically telling Logan he'd have to step over his body if he really wanted to leave. So Logan started to do exactly that, and the poor guy started screaming for him to wait. Our boy just smiled. He told the servant not to worry because he was going to leave a letter for his father. That way, no one would blame him for Logan running off. With that, Logan just walked right past him, leaving the servant sitting there completely stunned. He gave one last confident smirk and then he was gone. The servant just stared into space, trying to figure out what just happened. And then it hit him. He imagined what would happen when Logan's father read that letter. The Baron was going to be absolutely furious. The servant just stood there sweating. He knew he was in for it. And just as he feared, Logan's father read the letter. It said that Logan was so heartbroken by the engagement ending that he was just going out for some air and would be back soon. The Baron crushed the paper in his fist, absolutely furious. He screamed Logan's name at the top of his lungs. But Logan was already long gone, a smug look on his face. He knew exactly what he was doing. Back at the estate, the poor servant was having a total meltdown. He could only imagine the punishment that was coming his way. As Logan traveled, he thought about his family's history. Turns out, just 200 years ago, the McLeans weren't the struggling family they were now. They used to rule a huge chunk of the kingdom's southwestern area. Their land stretched across multiple viscounties and plains. They were the undisputed lords of the region. But that all changed. For the last 3 generations, the McLean lords were completely useless. They lost their titles, their power, and most of their land. The best parts of their territory were given away to their vassals. The McLeans were basically chased out and forced to settle on some rough, useless land near the mountains. Their new home had nothing. No good crops, no valuable mines. Logan knew that even if they won the upcoming regional war, they'd just have to go begging for money again. He had to end this vicious cycle. And to do that, he needed a ridiculous amount of money, way more than the 3 million he had saved up. Luckily, he knew exactly who could give it to him, and that person was right here in this city. Logan finally arrived in Kyle, the biggest and wealthiest trading city in the entire kingdom. The streets were packed. Merchants were shouting, selling everything from imperial gems to rare southern fruits. Seeing all this just hammered home how poor and isolated his own family's lands were. He wasn't here to feel sorry for himself. He was looking for someone, and according to his memories, this was the city where that person spent their youth. His target was a man named Philip Claude, known across the continent as the Gold Bug. To understand Philip, you had to understand the Ares Empire. It was a nation built on pure talent, where anyone could succeed if they had the skills, no matter where they came from. Philip was a perfect example of that system. He became one of the richest merchants in the empire, a master of the war trade. But back in his home country, he was known by a different name, the Trader of Grandia Kingdom. But that was just a story. The truth, which Logan knew from his past life, was that Philip secretly used his massive fortune to support his homeland. He was a patriot in disguise and the key to Logan's entire plan. Logan scanned the streets, and that's when he saw him. He almost couldn't believe his eyes. It was him, all right. The man who would one day be known as the Gold Bug was kneeling in the middle of the street, completely broken. The man was muttering to himself, furious about being scammed. He had lost everything and had no idea how he was supposed to live. Logan knew from his memories that Philip's business had failed around this time. But honestly, seeing it in person was way worse than he'd imagined. The poor guy was so defeated, he was actually wondering if he should just give up on life. But just as he hit rock bottom, a hand landed on his shoulder. Logan smiled down and asked if he was Philip Claude. The man confirmed his name, then looked the stranger up and down. He saw the red hair and eyes and noticed the powerful look on his face. Logan let out a sigh of relief. He'd found the right man. He asked Philip if he had a moment to talk. Philip was totally confused. He had no idea who this guy was or how he knew his name. But he could see something intense in the stranger's eyes. As a businessman, Philip had seen that look 1,000 times. It was pure greed. He immediately assumed this guy was some kind of mercenary gangster here to collect a debt. The thought sent a wave of panic through him. The poor guy started stammering, asking if the repayment date was already here. He frantically promised that the money from a recent sale would arrive in a few days, begging the man to come back then. But Logan just smiled and told him that wasn't why he was here. He wasn't there to collect any debt. Philip was still freaking out, screaming that he didn't have the money and telling Logan to go away. Logan just stood there, completely unfazed by the guy's meltdown. He calmly tried to get the guy to stop freaking out, assuring him he wasn't there to collect any money. He put his hand over his chest, looking completely serious. Then he dropped the bombshell. He wasn't there to take money, he was there to invest it. Philip was stunned. The merchant couldn't believe what he was hearing. He asked if Logan was serious about investing in him, and Logan just confirmed it with a simple yes. The gears started turning in Philip's head. So this guy wasn't a debt collector after all. But that didn't make any sense either. He came to a new conclusion. This guy wasn't a gangster, he was just completely insane. Philip's mind was racing. It was crazy to think someone would invest in a total failure. But what if this kid was actually telling the truth? The merchant decided to test him, asking how much he was planning to invest. Logan just smiled and turned the question right back around, asking how much he needed. Our boy promised to give him enough money to not only repay all his debts but also make a full comeback. The offer was so huge, Philip could barely breathe. He just stared, completely stunned into silence. That's when Philip started to really look at him. He noticed the dirt and mud caked onto Logan's armor. This guy must have traveled a long way just to find him. This wasn't some random whim. The merchant started sweating. This whole situation was suddenly feeling very real. Logan asked him again, pressing for number. Philip just looked down, muttering about what a nasty piece of work this kid was. He was being completely outplayed. Logan just kept smiling, completely unfazed. But Philip wasn't buying it. He exploded, calling Logan a scammer just like all the others who had tricked him. He pointed a finger and said he wasn't a real investor. That's when his eyes landed on the crest on Logan's armor. He recognized it instantly. It was the symbol of the McLean barony. The merchant got right in his face, mocking the McLeans as a broke family that couldn't even pay their own debts. He threatened Logan, telling him that impersonating a noble was a crime punishable by execution. The guy was trembling with anger and desperation. He told Logan he'd picked the wrong person to mess with. Then he just completely lost it. He grabbed Logan by the collar and started shaking him, screaming that he was completely broke. But Logan wasn't rattled at all. He was actually impressed. Even at rock bottom, this guy had sharp judgment. Our boy knew this was the man who would become a business giant one day. Philip was having a full-on meltdown in the middle of the street, crying that he didn't have enough money to eat. Logan just stood there, trying to figure out how to calm this mess down. That's when Logan got an idea. Philip was still yelling, accusing him of being a scammer. But before he could finish, Logan told him to look closer. He held out his hand, and a golden flame of pure force ignited in his palm. The merchant froze. He knew exactly what that was. His mind started racing. A kid this young who had already awakened his force. A genius like that would never throw away his future on a petty scam. It just didn't make any sense. Suddenly, the guy was all smiles. He laughed nervously and apologized, admitting he'd been a little on edge lately. Then he politely asked what Logan's business was with him. Logan let out a quiet sigh. Finally, they could get down to business. He looked Philip right in the eye and told him he wanted to hire him forever. He explained that paying off his debt was just a bonus. The merchant was absolutely stunned. The merchant leaned in, pointing out the obvious. The McLean family didn't have the money to hire anyone. But Philip switched tactics. He asked Logan how much debt he was in right now. Logan admitted it was around 250,000 gold. The merchant's mind started turning. He offered to repay the debt and consider that Logan's price. But then he paused. He decided to sweeten the deal even more, offering another 300,000 gold for Logan himself. That brought the grand total to 550,000 gold. And he'd pay it all in cash. The number hung in the air. For a man like Philip who lived for money and opportunity, this was everything. In his eyes, Logan wasn't just some kid anymore. He was an angel, a walking pile of gold sent from the heavens. And with a deal that big on the table, they made it official with a magic contract, sealed in blood. The contract glowed brightly, sealing the deal between them. The mage who made the contract then cheerfully explained the fine print. If the subordinate Logan ever tried to harm his new boss, he'd feel a pain like his soul was being torn apart. She added that there were only two ways out of it. He could either become a high-ranked knight on his own, or hire a fourth circle mage for a ridiculous amount of money to break the curse. The reality of the situation finally hit Philip. This wasn't just a business deal, it was a magical cage. As they left the magic shop, Philip was already spiraling. He couldn't help but wonder if he had just been completely played. He thought Logan was an angel, a golden opportunity, but now he wasn't so sure. The merchant was out of his mind. Why would someone agree to a magic contract so expensive it could buy 100 slaves? Philip felt like he was the one who'd just been chained. Logan just laughed. He explained that since this was their first time meeting, there was no real trust between them. A contract this binding was the only way to guarantee they'd both stick to the plan. Logan's logic was simple. If Philip was going to invest a fortune, he needed a solid guarantee. He promised that once they actually built some trust, they could just get rid of the contract. He told Philip they should work well together from now on. Philip knew the contract was a total mess with no clear conditions or end date. But at this point, he was stuck. They shook hands. The merchant realized he had no choice but to trust him. He steeled himself and asked what he needed to do first. Logan grinned and gave his first instruction. He wanted Philip to buy some monster meat. Philip was floored. He thought Logan had to be some kind of psycho, asking if he really meant monster meat. Logan wasn't surprised by his reaction. Right now, everyone knew that monster blood and meat were poisonous, so people just burned the bodies. But our boy knew something they didn't. In just a few years, that was all going to change. Logan started explaining his plan. He knew that in the near future, someone would figure out how to neutralize the poison in monster blood using common stuff. Once that happened, areas without much food would start hunting monsters to survive. But that winter, they'd discover something else entirely. It turned out that eating the meat of a specific monster, the Kalok, could heal old disabilities. The results were surprising to say the least. The effects were so strong that even men with serious injuries saw a complete recovery. A year later, the Royal Mage Tower would officially confirm its properties, basically calling it the best performance enhancer on the continent. The demand for Kalok meat became so insane that the entire species was hunted to extinction, all because it was good for one thing. Our boy knew this was his golden ticket. He wasn't just going to make millions with this. He was going to make way more. Philip finally understood the scale of what Logan was planning. He grabbed his bag, ready to get to work. The poor guy was already starting to regret his decision. He just agreed to this massive, insane plan, and now he was seriously wondering if he should just cut his losses and run. Logan told him the budget for the monster meat would be 1 million gold. Philip absolutely lost it. He started shouting, asking who in their right mind would spend that much on something worthless. But Logan just told him to chill out, promising the profit would be enormous. The poor guy was completely against it, but Logan was dead serious. Logan was way ahead of him. He explained that just to transport one carcass, it would only cost about 200 gold, and if they hunted more and moved them all at once, it would be even cheaper. Philip was stunned. He couldn't believe Logan had already thought about something like shipping fees. The boy just coolly asked if his calculations were wrong. Philip had to admit the numbers weren't wrong, but he still thought 1 million budget was way too much. He started to wonder if Logan was planning to wait until the kingdom officially started hunting them and then buy the meat through the mercenaries guild. Logan just took a sip, completely unfazed. He asked if there was a problem with that plan. Philip tapped the table, telling Logan he was going about this all wrong. He explained that since monster meat is just considered garbage, Logan should go to the merchants guild instead. He should just ask for the price of regular beef. The thing is, merchants will try to sell anything to make a profit. Even if it's literally garbage, they'll find a buyer. He got this sly grin on his face. He explained that since the Karok meat is worthless, the merchants would probably be happy to give him all of it from across the whole kingdom. And that's when it hit Logan. This guy was an absolute genius. He was worth every single coin he'd spent on him. Philip told Logan not to worry about the money anymore. He would handle it. After all, his entire future was now tied to this crazy plan. But Logan had one more thing he needed to take care of. He asked Philip for another favor. Philip looked over the list Logan gave him. It was full of weird stuff like springs, glue, and cartridges. He asked if Logan was planning on making toys. Logan just grinned. He told Philip he was making something much better than toys. Of course, he couldn't tell him the truth that these were all parts for powerful weapons. He knew exactly what he was building. These were the same weapons the enemy kingdom used to conquer his homeland in his past life. With one of these, even a regular soldier could stop a knight in their tracks. But first, he needed someone to actually make the weapons. He also needed instructors to train his new soldiers. There was still a lot to do. 2 days later, they arrived in Harran, the city of mercenaries. Logan found his target, a rank of mercenary named Kaisalan. The man looked at him with his one good eye and asked if Logan really wanted to hire him as a trainer. Kaisalan admitted he'd never seriously trained anyone before. Logan told him not to worry. All he had to do was train the low-rank mercenaries that Logan was about to hire. Kaisalan tried to brush him off, saying he wasn't some expert trainer. He claimed he just taught a few youngsters some tricks, but Logan wasn't buying it. He knew this man well because they had worked together in his past life. He remembered Kaisalan was a master of every weapon and an incredible horseman. He also knew that in the future, Kaisalan's value as a trainer would skyrocket after an injury forced him to retire. He'd raise a powerful mercenary army, but they eventually failed because of their own arrogance. Our boy realized that in this new timeline, he could get to him before all that happened. Logan figured he knew exactly how to convince him. It was just going to cost a lot of money. So he made his offer 4,000 gold a month. Kaisalan was floored. The standard pay for rank a mercenary was 2,000 gold. This kid had just offered him double. The mercenary tried to refuse again, insisting he wasn't a trainer. Logan didn't even blink. He just raised the offer to 6,000. The poor guy was completely flustered. He stammered that even for that much money, he still preferred fighting missions. Logan just stood there calmly like he understood. He knew this was all part of the game. He opened his eyes and just said one word, 7,000. Kaisalan slammed his fist into the stone floor, cracking it. He screamed about how money isn't everything, then immediately asked what about 8,000. Turns out money was everything after all. The mercenary's anger vanished instantly. He happily agreed, saying he looked forward to working with Logan. And just like that, the deal was done. The legendary mercenary was officially on the team. Later, Dwayne was showing Kaisalan around. He explained that his official employer would be Baron McLean, Logan's father. Kaisalan admitted he was curious why Logan was hiring mercenaries for such a quiet territory. But he quickly added that as long as the money was good, he didn't really care about the reason. That was exactly what Logan wanted to hear. He needed people who would follow orders, no questions asked. As Logan walked through the city with his new mercenary, they saw a guard whipping a line of people in rags. The scumbag was screaming at them to move faster. They were all chained together, forced to march through the streets. Heavy iron balls were chained to their feet. Kaisalan leaned in and explained that this city Harran was famous for two things: mercenaries and slaves. He pointed ahead to where people were being kept in cages. That was the slave market. Logan just nodded. He already knew. He wasn't just here to see it. He told Kaisalan he was planning to buy a slave. His eyes scanned the area, already looking for someone specific. A merchant immediately spotted Logan and tried to reel him in, thinking he was just some rich kid from the countryside. The guy kept going, explaining that the slaves here were ridiculously cheap. But his smile faded fast when he got a good look at the man standing next to Logan. His eyes went wide. This clown dropped to his knees, absolutely terrified. He couldn't believe he was looking at Kaisalan, the famous rank of mercenary. Logan just smirked. Turns out hiring a famous mercenary had its perks. He stopped walking. This was the place. It was a tent surrounded by more guards than any other stall in the market. An old man came out and asked what he wanted. Logan didn't waste any time. He told the man he was here to buy a dwarf. The old man confirmed Logan's guess. He explained that dwarves were rare and got special treatment, then led them further inside. But Logan wasn't interested in the tour. He was here for one reason. The trader showed them past a cage filled with elves. They looked completely broken. The old man kept bragging about how hard they were to find, trying to build up the value. Finally, he grinned and pointed towards the back of the tent, announcing he had just the thing Logan was looking for. Logan didn't even need to get closer. He pointed to a figure in the shadows and ordered the man to bring that one out. The trader confirmed this was the dwarf he was looking for, and there he was. He was chained up like an animal. This was the man Logan needed to make his plans a reality. His hands were locked in a heavy wooden block, completely useless. He was shackled at the ankles, but the look on his face was pure defiance. The trader started his pitch, explaining that this wasn't just any dwarf, but a master craftsman from a race of legendary artisans. That definitely got Logan's attention. He immediately asked how much he was. The trader kept going, claiming this particular one was the best of the best. Logan just smiled, not taking the bait. He cut the man off and asked again how much. The old man laughed and held up 2 fingers. He said he'd give Logan a special discount for 200,000 gold. Logan's face went dark. He snarled at the man, asking if he looked like a total idiot. The trader just stared back, completely stunned. The trader was sweating bullets. He clearly wasn't used to someone pushing back this hard. And just like that, our boy had knocked the price down by 150,000 gold. The trader was left kneeling on the floor, completely broken. As they walked away, the dwarf grumbled that humans were awful. Logan just told him to be quiet, explaining that this was just the basics of business. The dwarf looked ahead, finally asking where he was being taken. Logan told him they were headed to the McLean barony, and that once they got there, he would do exactly as he was ordered. The dwarf processed that for a moment. He pointed out that while free dwarfs were known for their skills, slave dwarfs were a different story. He explained that even if he came from a family of artisans, he never grew up in a place where he could actually learn the craft properly. He was basically warning Logan that he might have wasted his money. Now, the real challenge wasn't buying him, but figuring out how to motivate him. Logan looked at the dwarf and made him an offer, a real one. He promised that if the dwarf worked his hardest for the next 20 years, he would personally send him back to the mountains, a free man. He pointed out that for a dwarf, 20 years was practically nothing. For a moment, the dwarf's eyes lit up. Freedom. It was something he probably never thought he'd hear again. And then the little bastard took off. He laughed and yelled at Logan not to go back on his word, then told the guards to catch him. The guards immediately started shouting that a slave was on the loose. The whole street erupted into chaos. But Logan didn't even flinch. He just stood there and watched the whole thing unfold, completely unfazed. The dwarf didn't get far. He rounded a corner and ran straight into someone, stopping him dead in his tracks. The man he'd run into looked absolutely furious. But it was his eyes that were truly shocking. One was bright red, the other was a piercing blue. The dwarf's mad dash for freedom lasted about 5 seconds. He rounded a corner and slammed right into a guy who looked absolutely furious. But as it turned out, this wasn't even the chaos Logan was interested. Just a few feet away, a different scene was unfolding. Another slave had tried to run for it, and the guards were making an example of him. The crowd gasped at the brutality. The kid on the ground looked up, and you could see he had the same strange eyes as the man the dwarf ran into, one red, one blue. Someone grabbed him from behind, pinning his arms. The guards started shouting that they'd found him. The kid's face went pale. It was over. Just then, some blonde-haired guy charged in and delivered a vicious kick, sending the poor kid flying. The attacker stood over the boy, confirming he'd been caught. But another man nearby, a bald guy with a mustache, looked deeply troubled by the whole thing. This man, Drell, was clearly not on board with what was happening. He clutched his arm, a pained look on his face as he watched. The blonde guard brutally kicked the kid, screaming at him for daring to try and escape. The boy on the ground looked up at his brother, tears streaming down his face, begging him to run away. The man with the eye patch vector told Logan to just ignore them, saying they were merely slaves and they should keep moving. But Logan didn't move. He stared back at the scene and his eyes went wide. He saw it clearly now, the bright blue hair and the strange red and blue eyes. It all felt so familiar. That's when it clicked. His mind was racing, but all he did was whisper Vector's name. Vector turned back, asking what was wrong, but Logan wasn't even looking at him anymore. He couldn't believe it, this kid. He was the Noble Slayer. In his past life, this boy grew up to be a legendary force user who took down his master and became one of the most wanted men alive. Logan remembered the stories. The Noble Slayer left a trail of bodies behind him. Soldiers, knights, anyone sent after him didn't stand a chance. He didn't just take down soldiers, he went right for the nobles themselves. It all started when he finally got one of the nobles. That single act made him a wanted man across the entire kingdom. Years later, he reappeared, but he wasn't just a boy anymore. He was a force user, and he used that power to hunt down every last member of the family that had enslaved him. His revenge didn't stop there. He started going after any noble he could find, which is how he earned his infamous title. Logan remembered it all clearly. In his past life, this kid's escape happened about a year after he'd become a mercenary, but right now he was just a boy. The opportunity was massive. If he could save this kid now, he'd have one of the most powerful force users of the future on his side. But there was a problem. The man screamed for someone to get this kid off his leg. But the boy just bit down harder, refusing to let go. He was holding on with pure, desperate fury. Logan just watched, thinking he knew the Noble Slayer was a powerful weapon but a dangerous one. He had to handle this carefully. The man was sweating, cursing at the kid who wouldn't release him. That's when a heavy kick landed. The boy was knocked away, hitting the ground hard. The man who'd been bitten spun around, absolutely furious. He demanded to know who the hell had just kicked him. And there he was, our boy Logan, standing right in front of him. He was the one who had stepped in. The slave trader stared, completely caught off guard. He had no idea who this guy was or where he'd come from. Then he saw the symbol on the man's armor. He realized this wasn't just some random person. This was someone with status. The trader's whole attitude changed instantly. He started laughing nervously, trying to explain that he was just disciplining his slaves. He asked what this noble sir desired. Logan cut right through the fake politeness. He told the man he wanted to buy the 2 slaves. The trader looked down at the 2 kids. He pointed out their rare red and blue eyes, warning Logan that they would be expensive. Logan just asked him for the price. The man said they would cost at least 10,000 gold each. Logan's expression went cold. Now Logan knew this was a total scam. A strong slave cost about 300 gold, so this price was insane. But he also knew a secret. That boy was the future noble slayer, worth more than this clown could even imagine. But this wasn't just about saving the kids. Logan looked at the state of all the slaves here and knew he couldn't let this bastard get away with his scam. He could see why. One of the children was holding the other, who looked like he was on the verge of collapsing entirely. The boy with the mismatched eyes looked up, tears streaming down his face as he called out to his brother. The trader, completely missing the mood, kept trying to sell them. He explained that these were the only 2 available and that any price over the standard would do. Then this clown started laughing, mocking Logan and suggesting he couldn't even afford the cost. It was a huge mistake. Logan's expression went ice cold. He put his hand on the hilt of his sword and asked the man if he really thought he was an idiot who didn't know the real price of slaves. The trader's face went pale. He finally understood he wasn't dealing with some rich fool. From a distance, someone was watching the whole thing go down. They thought to themselves about how much trouble this guy Vector was causing. The trader was left completely broken. With the deal done, Logan had his new assets. A little while later, one of the kids started to stir. The boy with the blue hair was so relieved. He told his brother he was amazed he woke up so fast, especially since his injuries were pretty bad. Logan just smiled. He explained that there was a good reason for the quick recovery. Turns out, he'd been secretly pushing his own energy into the kid the whole time. He mentioned that his force healing was way better than what most priests could manage. But as he did, he noticed something strange. The other kid, the one with the mismatched eyes, was staring right at the flow of his energy. Logan was stunned. He couldn't figure out how a little girl could possibly sense his power. He knew for a fact that even his experienced guard hadn't noticed a thing. He shook his head. He figured he must be seeing things. There was just no way. Suddenly, one of Logan's guards grabbed the purple-haired kid, and that was a huge mistake. The boy with the mismatched eyes absolutely exploded. He flew at Logan, screaming and ready to take him down. But our boy didn't even flinch. He just raised his hand and stopped the punch cold. The kid's attack was completely useless. Logan had him. The kid was in total shock. He couldn't believe his attack had done nothing at all. The other kid started yelling, telling him to run. But Logan just looked down at the boy and asked if he really thought he was anything like that scumbag slave trader. He loomed over him and the pressure was insane. This wasn't some merchant. This was a real warrior. The other kid was absolutely terrified. Logan told the boy that having a fighting spirit was good, but he needed to be much smarter about who he picked a fight with. Logan gave the boy Vector one final warning. He told him that if he followed orders, he'd make sure both he and his sister were safe. But if he ever tried something like that again, Logan wouldn't just get rid of him. He'd get rid of his sister too. The kid gritted his teeth, completely pinned down by Logan's power. He couldn't move an inch. Logan then knelt down to look him in the eye, his tone changing completely. He told the boy he rushed to his thought the warning was enough. And then he dropped a bombshell. He told Vector he planned to raise him to become a knight. Vector couldn't believe it, stammering as he asked if Logan was serious. Our boy just confirmed it, explaining that a knight was basically the same as a noble. For a slave, this was an impossible dream. Logan explained that if Vector became a knight, he'd finally be able to escape slavery for good. He sweetened the deal even more, promising that it wouldn't just be him. His sister would be free too. Vector turned to his sister, the weight of that promise hitting him all at once. This was their only way out. He clenched his fist, his mind was made up. He shouted that he would do it. The kid screamed with everything he had, his eyes burning with a new fire. He was all in. Logan just smiled, completely satisfied. That was exactly the answer he wanted. Turns out this wasn't just about kindness. Logan knew the boy had a violent streak, and his sister was the only thing that could keep him in check. She was the key. With that settled, Logan told Vector his training would start when they got back home. Then he turned his attention to the dwarf. It was Hemmer's turn. Logan asked Hemmer for a moment. The dwarf looked up a little confused. Logan announced that he'd prepared the contract. Hemmer was completely lost. He had no idea what Logan was talking about. Logan explained it was a magical contract. If Hemmer worked for him for 20 years, he promised he'd be a free man and could return to the mountains. The magic from the scroll lit up around him. The dwarf could barely believe what he was hearing. He asked if Logan was actually serious about sending him back to his people. After a lifetime of slavery, a simple promise was hard to trust. Logan just smiled, asking if he didn't want the deal. That snapped the dwarf right out of it. He immediately shouted that of course he wanted it. He would absolutely sign the contract. He looked up at Logan, his eyes filled with emotion. He swore he would do his absolute best for him. The poor guy just broke down, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in a long time, he had a real future to look forward to. The dwarf was overwhelmed, thanking Logan and swearing his loyalty. The magical contract glowed, sealing the promise. Logan watched him cry and knew he'd made the right call. The contract wasn't just a deal, it was motivation. His gamble had paid off. He felt pretty good about himself. He'd gotten everything he came for and then some. He'd even managed to get the infamous noble slayer on his side. With his pieces in place, the preparations for the coming war were moving along perfectly. The thing is, Logan had no idea what was really brewing. He was away making deals. Rumors about his bizarre behavior had started spreading all over the McLean territory. His reputation was hitting rock bottom, and someone was stuck trying to clean up his mess. Turns out, Logan's servant, a poor guy named Rick, was going through hell trying to keep the rumors from spreading outside their lands. He was at his breaking point, screaming and wondering where on earth Logan was. When Logan finally arrived back at the villa, his servant Rick was there to meet him. The poor guy looked absolutely overjoyed, like he'd been waiting forever. Logan just smiled and casually asked Rick if he'd been doing okay while he was gone. For a second, it was a perfectly normal reunion. Rick was just happy to see his master smiling. But that pleasant look on his face was just a mask. Underneath, the poor guy was about to break. And then he just snapped. He started screaming, demanding to know what on earth Logan had been doing. He told him the entire village was gossiping, calling him a monster meat enthusiast who blew 150,000 gold on the stuff. Turns out, a few days ago, someone had made a big announcement to the public. The people were completely baffled. They couldn't believe someone was actually buying monster meat. They all wondered who this crazy person could be, and that's when the name got out. It was Prince Logan McLean, the son of the bear. The thing is, the gossip wasn't just about the monster meat. People started digging up every bad thing Logan had ever done. They remembered him breaking off his arranged marriage and even conning money from his fiancée. This put the merchants in a tough spot. A guy named Philip, who was leading the charge, started having second thoughts. He thought spreading rumors about monster meat would be good for business, but he didn't realize Logan's reputation was this bad. He was starting to think this whole thing was a mistake. But then he remembered the price, 1 gold per kilo for trash meat. An opportunity like that was too good to pass up no matter who was buying. Honestly, none of them could believe it. Selling garbage for that much money was unheard of. So Philip rallied the others. He shouted at them, asking if they wanted to get rich. He told them to bring every piece of monster meat they could find, even jerky. And just like that, they were all in. Thanks to Rick's efforts, merchants from all over started collecting monster meat. But with every deal they made, the rumors about Logan spread even farther. Back at the villa, Logan was laughing his head off. He thought Philip did a great job, but Rick was completely stressed out. He told Logan this was no time to laugh and pointed at his new companions, reminding him how much gossip they'd all had to listen to. And he was right. The dwarf, the kids, and the one-eyed warrior all looked miserable. They had no idea what they'd gotten themselves into, and all the whispers were clearly getting to them. Logan tried to brush it off, but Rick insisted this was serious. He told him the family head was absolutely furious. As soon as he walked in, a woman sarcastically asked if he enjoyed his little trip. Logan just calmly corrected her, saying it wasn't a trip, it was a tour. That response did not go over well. His father's face twisted with pure rage. He mocked his son, saying that based on the rumors, it sounded like he had a wonderfully wild time. At least he enjoyed himself. But Logan didn't flinch. He told his father that rumors are just rumors and that he wasn't ashamed of anything he'd done. The woman watched from the side, a nasty little smile on her face. She was loving this. Then she chimed in, telling the family head that Logan clearly didn't understand his position. She claimed his actions were going to tarnish the family's honor. Logan told his mother she was being too harsh. He then calmly explained that he was just spending the money he got from breaking off his engagement. His mother was absolutely furious. She turned to his father, demanding to know if he was still going to take Logan's side after hearing that. But Patrick had heard enough. He roared at her to be quiet. He told her he wanted to speak with Logan alone and that she needed to leave. She couldn't believe it. He made it crystal clear he was the only one who would deal with Logan. With her gone, the room fell silent. Logan braced himself. And then his father finally exploded, screaming at him and demanding to know what on earth he was doing. His father pleaded with him, asking why on earth he was doing all of this. But Logan knew he couldn't just tell him the truth. His father would never understand. So Patrick laid it all out. He asked if Logan had any idea what people were saying about him, that he was violent, cruel, and obsessed with money. The whispers were everywhere. People were saying that he'd completely lost his mind. Patrick's voice grew heavy. He admitted he was tired of covering for him. Then he brought up Logan's deceased mother, saying he should at least try to act in a way that wouldn't bring her shame. Logan froze. The mention of his mother hit him like a punch. This was different. In his past life, his father had never, ever brought her up, not even when he disowned him. And that one small change meant everything. It meant his father hadn't completely given up on him yet. Taking a breath, Logan made his plea. He asked for just 1 year. He promised that within that year, he would prove that everything he was doing had a real purpose. He looked his father in the eye and begged him for this one chance. Patrick just stared back, his face unreadable. And with that, Logan left the room. Patrick sat alone in the quiet office, lost in thought. He couldn't get over it. His son had actually said please. The whole conversation felt completely foreign, like he'd been talking to a stranger. He decided to give Logan the year he asked for. But if his son couldn't prove himself by then, a hard decision would have to be made. He knew he had to put his feelings as a father aside. He was the head of the McLean family, and his duty was to protect it, no matter the cost. Patrick stared at a picture of his late wife, Reena. He quietly apologized to her, admitting he had no idea what was going on inside their son's head. He felt like he'd broken his promise to raise him well. Somehow, somewhere, he had been careless. But as soon as Logan got back to the estate, he was stopped in his tracks. He saw his younger brother, Ronian, and shouted in disbelief, asking if he'd already awakened his force. Ronian beamed, showing off the glowing energy in his hands. He was thrilled that his big brother had recognized his power right away. Logan was floored. His brother was only 14. In his past life, Ronian didn't awaken his force until much later during the regional war. This was a massive change. Then Ronian said something that completely caught him off guard. He claimed it was all thanks to Logan. He explained that the knights had been trying to stop him from seeing his brother. Logan's head snapped up. That was news to him. It finally clicked. His little brother had awakened his powers just so he could push past the guards and come see him. A huge grin spread across Logan's face. He was so proud. To get past 2 trained knights right after awakening, that was his brother all right. He pulled Ronian into a hug, already thinking ahead. Once his brother's new power settled down, he had a special technique to teach him, the Divine Sword's vision. With that, Ronian would become way stronger than he ever was in the original timeline. The future was already changing for the better. Sometime later, Logan arrived at a villa in the southern part of their territory. He walked up to the building and called out for a man named Dwayne. Dwayne reported that he'd done exactly as Logan asked. He'd gathered 350 C-rank mercenaries, and every single one of them was waiting inside. Inside, the mercenaries were already whispering. They weren't happy about being left in a rundown villa for 10 days. They were starting to think this whole thing was a scam, wondering if the young baron who hired them was just plain crazy. One of them even started making fun of Logan for wearing armor, calling him a little soldier boy. But Logan heard every word. He looked straight at the guy who was talking and called him out. The bald merc froze, completely surprised. He couldn't believe it. The dude stammered, asking how on earth Logan heard him from all the way over there. Logan just smiled. He told him it was easy to perceive things like that as long as you had the skill for it. Then he turned the question around, asking what kind of skill a C-rank mercenary had to be talking so much trash about others. He noted the guy had some pride which he didn't expect, so he told the loudmouth to step forward. In front of everyone, Logan laid out a challenge. If the guy could land even a single hit on him, he'd immediately pay him a year's wages and send him on his way. He swore on his honor as a noble, with all 350 of them as witnesses. The loudmouth didn't hesitate for a second. He grinned and stepped right up, ready for his payday. This clown got right in Logan's face trying to look tough. He was huge compared to him. The other mercs started whispering amongst themselves. They figured the guy had to be strong but not be rank strong or he wouldn't be working a job like this. But Logan didn't look worried at all. In fact, he looked almost bored. To make things even more interesting, Logan told the guy to go ahead and take the first shot. The merc laughed, telling Logan he'd regret it. He even sarcastically asked if Logan needed a handicap. Our boy just smiled back, completely unbothered. Done talking, the mercenary roared and threw a punch with everything he had. A huge burst of energy exploded from his fist. The hit landed with a massive shockwave. The entire room just went silent. Every single mercenary was staring, their mouths wide open in complete shock. But it wasn't Logan who got hit. The big guy was sent flying backwards, his face a mess. He didn't even have time to scream. The other mercs couldn't believe what they just saw. This kid took down a giant with a single punch. And Logan, he just stood there, casually fixing his sleeve like it was nothing. He let out a slow breath, totally unfazed. Then he looked up at the rest of them, a smirk on his face, and asked if anyone else wanted to try their luck. Not a single person moved. Every mercenary in the room just stared, their mouths hanging open. The challenge was over before it even started. The loudmouth who started all this was out cold, his face a complete mess. Logan stood over him, his fists still crackling with golden energy. This wasn't just some noble kid playing soldier. He calmly adjusted his sleeve, the light from his hand slowly fading away. He looked at the rest of them with a grin, asking if anyone else wanted to run their mouth. The realization finally hit them. He was a force user and way too young to be this strong. The men just stood there, whispering in shock. One of them couldn't help but mutter that this whole situation was completely ridiculous. But one of them, a veteran with an eye patch, was watching Logan with a different kind of look. He thought to himself that he knew this kid was unusual, but he never imagined he'd be this good. Logan looks over the crowd with a smug smile. He figures no one else is brave enough to step up. With the room silent, he finally introduces himself. He's Logan McLean, the one who brought them all here. He knows they're all wondering why he's throwing so much money around. He pauses for a second, a confident look on his face. Then he drops his big idea. He's going to train them all to be crossbow cavalrymen. The mercenaries just stare, completely confused by the announcement. Even the veterans in the group are shocked by the idea. The whispers start immediately. Crossbows on horseback, they'd spend the whole battle just trying to reload. The veteran with the eye patch, a guy named Logan, leans in. He tells Logan directly that crossbows are terrible weapons for cavalry, but Logan just listens as if he was expecting this. Logan was stunned. He asked Logan why he'd pick crossbows when he clearly knew their biggest weakness. Sure, they hit hard, but it takes an untrained soldier over a minute just to load one. The veteran laid out the problem. You have to use your foot to reload a crossbow. On a horse, that's impossible. Even if a rider carried 3 or 4 pre-loaded ones, they'd be useless after a single minute of fighting. Logan listened to all of it, completely unfazed. He admitted that from their perspective, it probably looked like he was just a rich kid wasting money playing soldier. But he told Logan that he was absolutely certain about his plan. He told the veteran to just train the men for now. The reason would become clear later. Our boy promised that these crossbow cavalrymen would become a huge asset for the McLean family long after the next war was over. Logan just stared back, processing everything. He didn't argue anymore. After a moment, he gave his answer. He was in. A few days later, the results of the initial test were in. Logan looked over the list. Out of the 350 mercenaries he'd hired, only 312 had passed the simple qualification test. He looked at the number, perfectly satisfied. That was good enough. With the mercenaries sorted, Logan moved on to the next part of his plan. That's when an expert dwarf craftsman he'd hired finally came to see him. The dwarf held up the paper Logan had given him, completely confused. He just stared at it and asked what in the world he was looking at. Logan just smiled. He told him it was a schematic for the new crossbow they were going to make. He admitted that to a professional's eye, the drawing was probably a mess. But he explained that this was a weapon he'd used for decades. He'd drawn every part he could remember, confident that an expert like the dwarf could fill in the blanks. The dwarf looked back at the plans, trying to make sense of it. He muttered about putting a cartridge on the back for auto-loading and making it fire 3 shots in a row. He finally looked up, disgusted, and asked who the hell came up with this garbage. From across the desk, Logan just calmly said something. The room went quiet. The dwarf wasn't angry anymore. He was just staring at the design, actually thinking it over. The dwarf admitted that on second thought, the idea was actually pretty new. But he immediately started pointing out the problems. He explained that with this structure, the strings would break easily. Plus, the wooden box on the back would be super uncomfortable for whoever was shooting it. He looked at Logan, asking how he was supposed to fix all that. Logan just smiled back innocently and told him he had no idea. That was the dwarf's job to figure out. The dwarf absolutely lost it. He was so mad he was practically shaking. Logan quickly told him to calm down, saying he was just messing with him. Then he laid out the real plan. He told the dwarf to make the bolt smaller, which would let them shrink the cartridge too. He explained that the cartridge was basically an one and done deal. You just reload with a new, pre-made one after every shot. To make it simple, Logan told him to think of them as magazines. That's when it clicked for the dwarf. The craftsman's eyes went wide. He sputtered that even a skilled shooter couldn't fire a crossbow twice in a minute. This wasn't just a new weapon, it was something from a different time altogether. Logan just smiled to himself. Of course, the dwarf had never seen anything like it. This weapon wasn't from their time, it was from the future. The dwarf stared at the plans, his mind racing. It was made of simple things, a cartridge, a spring, some wood, and a bowstring. The simplicity was what made it so incredible. Fire lit up in his eyes. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was a real challenge. He decided right then and there that he would do it. Logan leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. He looked at the dwarf and asked him how long it would take to build. The dwarf was not happy about that. He couldn't believe Logan was asking for a deadline on something that had never been built before. Logan just shrugged, saying it was still a weapon made by humans. That hit the dwarf like a punch to the gut. He stammered, demanding to know who else could possibly have made something like this. Our boy just gave him a sly grin. He told the craftsman he didn't need to know that, and if he thought he couldn't do it, he should just give up now. That was all it took. The dwarf's pride kicked in. He pointed right at Logan and declared that in 1 month he wouldn't just build it, he'd build something far better. Logan just smirked. He knew exactly how to handle a dwarf's ego. The weapon would be his. With that settled, he turned his attention to his other project, building his new army. He was pushing a young boy named Victor to the absolute brink of collapse. Logan yelled at him, telling him he was slowing down and needed to run faster. The poor kid was giving it everything he had, his body screaming at him to stop. Finally, his legs gave out and he collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Logan just stood there watching him silently. He thought about how for days he'd done nothing but feed and rest these new recruits. Honestly, he couldn't believe what a huge difference a little bit of good food had made. But even after collapsing, the kid wasn't done. He pushed himself back up and kept going. Finally, his body gave out completely. That's when Logan's voice cut through, telling him to rest. The moment he hit the dirt, a young girl came running, calling out his name. In the background, Logan just watched, and he was seriously impressed. He thought about how this 14-year-old kid, who was way smaller than the others, just ran 20 kilometers without a break. The kid had talent. But what Logan really loved was the kid's determination. All his worries about whether he'd picked the right person were gone. That's when it hit him. In his past life, Victor was known as the noble slayer, a ruthless killer. But looking at him now, Logan realized he wasn't born that way. Something must have happened to change him. The girl looked at him with pure worry, while Victor just gave a weak, tired smile. Logan watched them, his mind racing. He now had another future he needed to protect. But there was no time to rest. Logan's voice cut through, telling Victor to get up. The next training session was starting right now. Logan explained that from now on, they'd be learning the Grandia Kingdom's sword technique, the same style every knight trainee in the country has to master. He told Victor to watch and learn. Then Logan picked up a wooden sword himself, ready to demonstrate. His grip on the practice sword was tight, like he was holding a real blade. He raised the sword high, then brought it down in a single, powerful motion. Victor watched every single move, his eyes locked on Logan, absorbing everything. The kid was completely drained. All he wanted to do was pass out and sleep right there. But he knew this exhaustion was the price for good food and a safe place to sleep. To him, it was a price worth paying, even as the strain made his nose start to bleed. Despite the pain and exhaustion, Victor's eyes were locked in. He was ready to copy the move. He gripped the wooden sword and began to swing. The movement was an exact copy of what Logan had just shown him, down to the last detail. Logan just stared, completely stunned. He couldn't believe it. Victor had copied everything perfectly after seeing it just once, not just the movements, but even the breathing. Logan realized this kid's talent might even be greater than his own brother Ronian's. A small smile formed on his face. This kid was a real diamond in the rough. He told Victor that if he could build up his stamina and perform that sword technique 1,000 times in a row, he could probably call himself a knight. The word echoed in Victor's mind, a knight. For a kid who had nothing, that single word was a future he never imagined. Logan looked at the kid with a confident smile, asking if he was really up for the challenge. Without a single hint of doubt, Victor promised he could do it. Logan told him that if he needed anything for his training, he should just talk to Rick. But Victor said he didn't need a thing. Logan was a bit surprised. He pressed him, asking if he was sure. Victor looked back, his sister standing behind him. He didn't want weapons or money. He just asked Logan to keep looking after his sister. For him, that was more than enough. His eyes were filled with a terrifying resolve. This wasn't just about becoming strong, it was a promise. A genuine smile spread across Logan's face. He was more than satisfied with that answer. He knew Victor wouldn't be ready for war anytime soon, but in the future he'd be a huge asset. With that settled, Logan turned his mind to the next part of his plan, the mercenary corps and the new weapons they'd soon have. Still, Logan knew he couldn't get his hopes up. There was a chance Hammer wouldn't be able to make a good crossbow, and even if he did, the mercenaries might not be able to use them properly. He'd put everything in someone else's hands for now. That meant he needed another plan just in case. So he went to see his father. Patrick McLean looked up from his desk, completely surprised by his son's sudden request. He asked if Logan was serious about wanting to join the Knights training. Logan didn't hesitate for a second. With absolute conviction, he confirmed that's exactly what he wanted. The next day, Logan headed out to the training grounds. Heinkel, the captain of the McLean Knights, gathered his men. He announced that from that day forward, young Master Logan would be joining them. The Knights were furious. They couldn't believe it. They started muttering that Logan must be getting arrogant after his one win, thinking he could just waltz in and train with them. Heinkel just listened, his face like stone. This wasn't a surprise to him. Turns out this whole thing was decided earlier. Patrick had called Heinkel in to discuss his son. Heinkel had warned him that putting Logan in with the regular Knights would cause problems. The men wouldn't like it. But Patrick didn't care. He told Heinkel not to give Logan any special treatment at all. He wanted his son to be pushed, to be trained just like any other rookie knight. Heinkel was in a tough spot. Patrick's order to treat Logan like any other rookie was a headache. Honestly, it would have been way easier if he'd just been told to go easy on the kid. But that's when Logan stepped in, telling the captain not to worry. He made a deal right then and there. If he fell behind on even a single training drill for 1 week, he'd walk away and pretend the whole thing never happened. Heinkel was completely stunned. This wasn't the arrogant young master he was expecting at all. Logan just gave a slight nod, his expression dead serious. The deal was made. A nasty grin spread across Heinkel's face. He turned to his men and announced that for the next week, their training would be at triple the normal difficulty. The training began immediately, and it was absolutely brutal. Just moments in, the Knights were already grunting from the sheer intensity. Heinkel wasn't kidding around. The first drill was insane. The Knights had to carry each other on their backs in full armor. They were already completely exhausted. But Heinkel, the captain, had no sympathy. He screamed at them that they were cavalry knights and needed to understand how it felt to be a horse. He told them to feel the weight of a fully armored knight on their backs, just like their horses do on the battlefield. The Knights were furious. They realized this hell was all because of that troublemaker Logan. They started betting on how long he'd last. One guy gave him 3 days. Another said he wouldn't even make it through one. But while they were busy complaining, Logan was just running. He had another knight on his back and didn't look like he was struggling at all. In fact, he was starting to pull away from the rest of the group. That's when they noticed it. The troublemaker they expected to quit in an hour was somehow in the lead. Heinkel couldn't believe his eyes. And to make it even crazier, the guy was smiling. Not a pained grimace, but a genuine, confident smile. Heinkel watched, his face twisting in annoyance. At this rate, it wouldn't be Logan who fell behind, it would be his own knights. He gritted his teeth and finally yelled for everyone to halt. Logan stopped, still carrying the other soldier on his back without any trouble. The captain announced a 10-minute rest. The second he said it, almost every knight just dropped to the ground, completely spent. But Logan was still on his feet, walking over like it was nothing. One of the other knights came up to him, putting a friendly arm on his shoulder. He asked Logan how he was holding up. The guy was hoping Logan would admit how tiring it was. If the young master complained, maybe the captain would end this crazy training. But Logan just looked at him and said it was doable. The knight's face fell. He couldn't believe it. But Logan just smiled and said the training was great. He explained that if the knights do this every day, it's no wonder they're so strong. He even told the captain he was looking forward to the next session. In the background, the other knights could only curse, completely wiped out. The captain just stood there sweating. But inside, Logan was confused. This wasn't what he was going for at all. He was trying to bond with them, not make them feel weak. Later that night, under a full moon, Logan stood alone in a clearing, making sure he was by himself. He quietly asked if all the knights had returned. He was relieved to be alone. The truth is, training with the knights was his insurance policy. If all his other plans with mercenaries and weapons failed, he'd have to join the knights on the front lines. So he figured he might as well start getting strong with them now. And on top of that, it was a good way to build his own strength. He knew meditation was key to growing his force, but that was only half the battle. He had to train his body too. And that's where the brutal training with the Knight's Order came in. It was the perfect way to push his physical limits. A grin spread across his face. It was working. As his force core grew, he realized he didn't even feel tired anymore. He stood there in the quiet woods, feeling the new energy coursing through him. He focused, channeling that power into his blade. Then he swung with everything he had, and the force of the blow tore the ground apart. He stared at the glowing sword, completely amazed. All this power and his force core was only at the 1-star level. This was just the beginning. He thought about how much stronger he could get. If he could just reach the 2-star level, he might even be on par with his own father. The thought alone was enough to make him feel a little giddy. Meanwhile, in another part of the estate, his other plans were being put into motion. But it seemed the first prototype was a complete failure. The second one wasn't any better, and the third attempt was also a bust. Logan looked at the craftsman completely unimpressed. He pointed out all the flaws. The string was wrong, it only shot one round, and he never asked for an integrated magazine. The dwarf hammer just stared back, clearly annoyed. He started to argue, but it was obvious Logan's standards were ridiculously high. Logan suddenly slapped his forehead, pretending he'd made a huge mistake. He apologized, saying he shouldn't have said what he did. Hammer wasn't having it. He got defensive, arguing that even as his master, Logan couldn't disrespect a craftsman's pride. Logan saw his opening. He sighed dramatically, saying that if this was really Hammer's best work, then he guessed there was nothing to be done about it. He really started laying it on thick. He said all those weeks of work resulted in nothing, and that he was the one at fault for expecting too much. Logan kept pushing, shouting that he judged the dwarf all wrong. The insult hit Hammer like a physical blow. Then his expression turned cold. He gave Hammer a simple deadline: 1 month. The dwarf just stared back, his face completely red with fury. His pride had been wounded, and now he had something to prove. With a furious grunt, he snapped the prototype crossbow in half with his bare hands. He was done with this failure. It was time to build something real. Logan watched silently as the dwarf seethed with anger. He'd pushed him, and now Hammer was so furious he was going to start over from scratch. A wicked grin spread across his face. He knew that a dwarf's pride, when properly provoked, could create something truly amazing. This was exactly what he wanted. 1 month later, the seasons had changed. Hammer stood ready, holding his new creation. It was time to show the results of his hard work. He fired, and 2 bolts shot out at the same time. They flew through the air with incredible speed and power, heading straight for the target. Both bolts slammed into the target, one hitting the bullseye dead on. Logan's eyes went wide. Hammer cleared his throat, looking incredibly smug. He explained that while it had 1 less shot, it was easier to use with 1 hand and had a replaceable magazine. It was a masterpiece. Logan couldn't believe it. Reloading and firing the crossbow took less than 5 seconds. He realized that while it had less range than the weapon from his past life, this version was way better for soldiers on horseback. As Hammer proudly explained the details of his work, Logan knew this was a game changer. Huge grin spread across his face. He was thinking about the future. With a weapon this good, they were months ahead of schedule for the war. But Hammer wasn't happy. He'd been pouring his heart into explaining his masterpiece, and Genius over here was just smiling to himself. He snapped at Logan, demanding to know if he was even listening. Logan finally snapped out of his thoughts. He grabbed the dwarf in a big hug, laughing, and told him he did an amazing job. He was so excited he lifted Hammer right off the ground, shouting praises for all to hear. The poor dwarf got super flustered and told him to cut it out. Logan just looked at him with a genuine smile. He was truly grateful for all the hard work. The poor dwarf was completely flustered, stammering as he asked what had gotten into him. But Logan wasn't just happy. He was scheming. With a seriously intense grin, he asked if Hammer could make 100 of those crossbows in just 2 months. A bolt shot out from the new crossbow with incredible force. It slammed into a distant rock, shattering the surface. Sometime later, a demonstration was being held in the snow. A veteran knight held the new weapon, with Logan and Hammer watching from the side. The other soldiers were completely stunned. They couldn't believe the range and power, especially since it could fire multiple shots. The veteran knight was practically blushing, totally flustered. He couldn't wrap his head around how a crossbow this powerful could even exist. His mind immediately went to the battlefield. An entire army of mounted troops armed with these. The thought was absolutely terrifying. He turned to Logan, his eyes wide with respect. He finally understood what Logan meant when he talked about creating crossbow cavalrymen. Logan just smiled, giving credit where it was due. He explained that Hammer was the one who went through hell to make it happen. Logan was thrilled. Turns out Hammer had finished the order 2 weeks early and even made 100 extra crossbows. The poor dwarf had worked himself to exhaustion, but the results were amazing. He thought about sharing the weapons with the main knight's order, but decided against it. The risk of the technology leaking was too high, and honestly, they couldn't afford it anyway. Instead, he turned to the veteran knight with a new mission. He told him to equip the mercenaries with the crossbows and start clearing out all the monsters from outside their territory. The knight was completely stunned. Logan just gave him a sly grin, asking if he really thought it was impossible. The knight looked down, seriously considering the order. He was clearly hesitant. Remembering the sheer power of the weapon, he finally admitted that with these crossbows, it might actually be possible. But Logan immediately shut that down. For him, might be possible wasn't good enough. He looked the knight dead in the eye and gave him a direct order: make it possible. Because if they couldn't even accomplish this, then everything they were building was completely meaningless. Veteran knight's eyes narrowed. He knew these weapons weren't just for subjugating monsters. Logan handed him a crossbow and the knight took it, his mind racing. Watching Logan arm the mercenaries, the knight's suspicion was confirmed. This wasn't a monster hunt. This was preparation for war. Sometime later, the training had begun in earnest. One of the knights watching the training could barely believe his eyes. Logan was running laps with 2 fully armored men on his back. The soldiers watching were stunned by his insane stamina. They couldn't help but wonder if that ridiculous physical ability was genetic. If he was anything like his father, he must be a monster with a sword too. But the other soldier scoffed at the idea. He reminded his friend that Logan had lost to his own younger brother before he'd even awakened his power. He thought there was no comparison. The first guy paused, considering that. He admitted it was true, but what he was seeing now was something else entirely. For over a month, Logan endured this insane training. Hilariously, the very thing designed to make him quit had become the new standard for the entire Knights Order. The other knights felt it too. The training was exhausting, but it was way more rewarding than their old routine. It lit a fire under the low-ranked knights who had been taking it easy. It even had an unexpected side effect. By carrying each other, the knights finally understood what their horses went through every day, and a new respect was born. The bonds between them were getting stronger too. One knight awkwardly apologized to his partner for being too heavy, but his friend just told him not to worry about stuff like that. They were comrades after all. The poor guy got completely flustered by the genuine show of friendship. Turns out, this hellish training was actually bringing everyone closer together. The veteran knight who started all this watched with a small smile. He admitted to himself that he only kept it up because Logan refused to quit, but he couldn't argue with these incredible results. Logan felt that shift. He could feel the respect from the very man who tried to break him. Something had definitely changed. The veteran knight watched him, a small smile on his face. Logan noticed the look. He thought to himself that his lucky charm had just walked right into his life, but he was so tired he wasn't sure if he was just imagining things. Later that night, Logan was in his room meditating. He had a system. After pushing his body to its absolute limit, he would stimulate his mind through meditation. The two parts of his training were working together, and he could feel himself making real progress. He was even starting to feel a shift in his aura. He knew that if he could just keep improving his martial arts, according to his plan, he could surpass the monsters from his previous life. The superhumans, the aura masters, even the archmages. He was determined to become stronger than all of them. He let out a slow breath, his meditation finally coming to an end. Suddenly, a bright light started to form in his chest. All the aura he'd been building up was gathering in one place. The energy pulsed once, then exploded outwards, filling the entire room with a golden light. The power was so intense it felt like the air itself was burning. And then the light settled into a small, perfect sphere. He had done it. It was complete. He looked down at the glowing orb in his hand. This was the Star Core, the first major step in his new training. This, he finally had the foundation he needed to learn the next secret technique of his swordsmanship. He thought about the power of his first technique, the Iron Slash. If that one move was already so strong, he could only imagine what the second one would be like. He knew that if he could just master this new technique before the war started, he'd be on a whole new level. He was so confident in its power that he believed even a high-ranking knight wouldn't stand a chance against him. Next day out on the plains, things were far from peaceful. A group of monsters looked up, startled by the sound of something approaching. The ground started to shake. It was a full-blown cavalry charge, thundering across the field straight towards the monster horde. The man leading the charge had a look of pure determination. He raised his fist, giving the signal to his troops. And with that, his entire force charged forward, ready to wipe the monsters off them. The soldiers raised their brand new crossbows, taking aim from horseback. As they thundered across the field, they unleashed a volley of bolts. The impact was instant. The first monster went down screaming. Before the monsters could even mount a defense, another one was hit square in the chest. They were getting picked off one by one, completely helpless against the ranged assault. The entire front line of the monster horde was wiped out before the cavalry even got close. The man leading the mercenaries, a veteran with an eye patch, watched the chaos with a calm expression. His men, on the other hand, couldn't believe their eyes. They were completely stunned by how effective the new weapons were. The men were going wild. One of them bragged that his bolt went straight through one monster's head and took down another one right behind it. Logan watched from a distance as his men celebrated their easy victory. The results were even better than he'd hoped. 100 monsters, all gone in less than 10 seconds. His mercenaries were already getting faster at reloading, breaking their old habits. A small smile crept across his face. This long trip into the territory had definitely been worth it. The veteran mercenary leader rode up beside him and asked if he was satisfied. Logan admitted they'd gotten a lot better, but he remembered how messy their first hunt had been. The leader watched him, his expression turning serious. He clearly had something on his mind. He finally asked Logan what this was all for. He pointed out that no mercenary army had ever had this kind of power. He wondered if Logan was planning to take on monsters all over the continent. Just as the mercenary leader was questioning him, a rider came galloping towards them, shouting for the young master. Logan and the leader turned around. A man on horseback was approaching at full speed. The messenger looked completely panicked. He shouted that someone named Rick had sent him with an urgent message. Logan looked confused. The name Rick sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. The rider's voice was shaking. He explained that yesterday, Viscount Tesseron had finally made his move. The air grew heavy. Everyone waited for the rest of the news. The messenger finally yelled the terrible news. Viscount Tesseron had officially declared war on them. Logan's face went cold. The fight was here. Far away, Viscount Tesseron was broadcasting his message. He roared that he was blaming the House of McLean for the wrongful death of his ancestor. This was his official reason for declaring war. Patrick McLean, Logan's father, watched the message come through. His face was grim. His advisors couldn't believe it. One of them questioned the ridiculous excuse, pointing out that Tesseron was blaming them for something that happened ages ago. The room was filled with tension. His wife looked at him, her voice filled with worry, asking what he was going to do. One of the commanders laid out the hard truth. Viscount Tesseron's army was much bigger than theirs. He admitted their chances of winning were incredibly low. Another advisor spoke up, suggesting they should have secured better reinforcements when they had the chance. It was clear they were on their own. While his men debated and worried, Patrick was silent. Someone suggested sending an envoy to try and make peace, but his expression said it all. There would be no negotiating. Patrick slammed his fist on the table. He roared for silence, completely fed up with the arguing. He pointed out that Tesseron had declared war without the royal family's permission. This wasn't a mistake, it was a planned attack. His eyes practically glowed with anger. He was done talking. There was only one path forward. He stood and gave the order, prepare for war. He demanded they come up with a plan for victory, not just survival. He made it absolutely clear he wouldn't tolerate any more arguments. The decision was final. The advisor stood in silence. They knew there was no changing his mind now. But his wife looked worried. She had one last question. She asked if the young masters, her sons, would have to go to war too. The lady of the house looked on, her face filled with worry. Patrick didn't hesitate. He confirmed that his sons would be going to war as well. He explained that Ronian's force had awakened, and Logan was now old enough to do his part for the family. The advisor added that since both sons were force users, they'd be a huge help. But his tone was uneasy. That's when one of the servants realized something. He blurted out that the young master wasn't even here. Without a second thought, the man took off running. He had to find him and tell him what was happening immediately. Miles away, the messenger finally found Logan and relayed the entire story. Logan listened, his expression turning to ice. The war he'd been preparing for had finally arrived. Logan's mind was racing. According to his memories, this war wasn't supposed to happen for another 2 months. Something had gone wrong, and the future he knew was already changing. The messenger begged him to hurry. He explained that Tesseron's forces were already on the move, breaking all customs by attacking right after the declaration. If Logan didn't leave immediately, he'd be late to his own family's. There was no time to think. Logan clenched his fist, his decision made. He turned to his men. The Logan mercenary corps looked more than ready to go. Logan's expression was cold and serious. The time for training was over. The mercenary leader Kai didn't seem surprised at all. He just grinned, saying that for guys like them, a war breaking out was good news. If there wasn't one, they'd want to start one themselves. Logan just gave him a look, thinking that was a pretty terrible thing to say. Kai gestured to their new crossbows. He said it was only natural they'd be itching for a fight when they finally had such great weapons to use. Logan looked over at his men. They were way too confident, almost arrogant. But he had to admit they had a right to be. After all, they had just completely wiped out a massive flock of monsters. To them, it didn't matter when the war started. All they had to do was win. And he knew they had the power to do it. While the rest of the McLean house was panicking, Logan's mercenaries were sure of their victory. He gave the order for all 314 of them to move out. The war started sooner than anyone thought. The very next day, Tesseron's army showed up right at the McLean estate. Inside the main house, everything was still, the calm before the storm. A messenger burst into the room, his face pale with fear. He shouted that Tesseron's army had over 1,000 regular troops and 100 knights, but that wasn't the worst part. They had also gathered nearly 10,000 conscripts. This was an all-out war. Patrick McLean was furious. He couldn't believe Ham and Tesseron had gone this far. Knights were one thing, they were basically superhumans to the average person. But to drag thousands of regular people into a war between two local families, it was completely insane. He gritted his teeth, wondering why the hell Tesseron was doing this. But the messenger wasn't done. He hesitated for a moment, clearly afraid to say what was next. He delivered the final blow. The House of Kairos had just informed them they wouldn't be sending any troops. The woman's eyes went wide. She couldn't believe it. She insisted there had to be some kind of mistake. But the messenger confirmed it. He had checked himself several times. The news was true, they had been abandoned. Patrick was shaking with anger. Their so-called allies had completely turned their backs on them. With no other choice, he gave the order. Gather every man who could hold a weapon. They would respond with everything they had. Backed into a corner, McLean had to scrape together an army to fight against Tesseron. And so the troops began to assemble. First came the knights, all 53 of them. Then came the 552 regular troops. But the bulk of their force was made up of over 4,400 conscripts, farmers and commoners pulled from their homes. Altogether, they had just over 5,000 men. This wasn't a professional army. Looking at the terrified faces of the men, it was clear they knew they were being sent to their doom. The McLean army stood ready. Every available man from knight to farmer was lined up for battle. But it was a desperate gamble. This entire force was less than half the size of Tesseron's army. Patrick McLean let out a heavy sigh. The weight of leading these men to a near-certain doom was crushing him. Meanwhile, whispers started spreading through the ranks. The soldiers were asking where the first young master was. One of them figured he wasn't coming back. He must have heard about the war and run away. That's when Ronian spun around on his horse, his face filled with anger. He demanded to know what they were talking about. He shouted that there was no way his brother would ever do something like that. Ronian's faith was absolute, and he was right. His brother hadn't run, he was preparing. He remembered what his brother had told him. Logan had promised to teach him a secret technique, swearing they would save their family together. His voice echoed across the field, filled with absolute conviction. There was no doubt in his mind. But his outburst didn't silence the soldiers. The whispers just got louder. The doubt spread like poison. Men started questioning if the rumors were true, shocked that the Lord's own son would abandon them. Ronian's confidence started to crack. He looked over at his father, his expression filled with uncertainty. That's when his father spoke, his voice heavy. He told Ronian that with Logan gone, he had to take his brother's place. He ordered him to stand tall and not waver no matter what. The entire army was watching him now. Ronian clenched his fist. He was furious with himself. Why was he even starting to doubt his own brother? He raised his sword high. He told his men that the doubts didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was winning this war. With a roar, Patrick McLean gave the order to charge. He screamed for them to crush the enemy scum. And just like that, the entire army surged forward as one. On the other side of the field, the enemy commander watched with a smug grin. This clown, Viscount Tesseron, boasted that his knights were his real swords and sent them to face Patrick head-on. But Patrick didn't hesitate. He galloped forward, leading the charge himself. He rode hard, his eyes locked on the enemy line. As the distance closed, a powerful red aura began to glow from his weapon. The first clash was just seconds away. He knew his first move had to be decisive. He had to smash right through the enemy's front line. With a roar, he poured all his energy into his blade, his red aura exploding around him as he swung with everything he had. But one of Tesseron's knights met the charge head-on, raising his shield to block the blow. The impact was huge, sending a shockwave through the air. Patrick couldn't believe it. This single knight had completely stopped his attack. The knight just grinned. He wasn't just some random soldier. This was going to be a real fight. Meanwhile, on the front lines, a young soldier was breathing hard, sweat pouring down his face as he gripped his spear. The chaos of the battlefield was getting to him. He was terrified. Flashes of the battle kept hitting him, a man screaming about his arm, another collapsing in despair. He tried to push it all down and focus on the fight, but all he could see were the faces of the fallen, begging for help that never came. The poor guy was shaking, completely overwhelmed. He looked around at the slaughter and knew it was bad. They were losing. He knew they were at a huge disadvantage. He wasn't even a real soldier, just a servant thrown into the fight. If they got surrounded here, it was all over. He tried to force himself to fight, to do something, anything. But it was too late. An enemy soldier slammed into him, knocking him flat on his back. The enemy knight stood over him, screaming as he raised his spear for the final blow. Suddenly, a sword flashed out of nowhere, blocking the attack just inches from his face. It was one of their own men. The allied knight held back the enemy's weapon. Then he turned and screamed at the servant, ordering him to get up and grab his spear. The poor guy was flooded with relief. He stammered out a thank you, just grateful to be alive. But a second later, an arrow slammed into the knight's back. The man who had just saved him, Kuik, collapsed right in front of his eyes. The servant didn't even hesitate. He saw the man who saved him drop, and he just turned and ran. His only thought was to get to the back lines, as far away from the fighting as possible. He sprinted past fallen soldiers and the sounds of fighting, not daring to look back. He just kept running, pushing through the absolute horror of it all. The poor guy was completely losing it. But when he finally broke through the chaos, he didn't find safety. He found another line of enemy soldiers waiting for him. They had been surrounded from the... His face went pale. There was nowhere left to run. He was sure this was the end. Meanwhile, at the front of the charge, Patrick McLean slammed into the enemy line like a meteor. The force of the impact was so strong it sent his horse staggering backward. Patrick was completely thrown off balance. He dug his boots into the dirt, fighting just to stay upright. The enemy knight coughed up some blood, but he was still standing. He admitted that Patrick was as strong as his reputation suggested, but it was clear they had come prepared for this fight. Patrick gritted his teeth. This was bad. His arm was trembling from the impact. He realized the knight had just blocked a full-force attack. He couldn't believe it. Tesseron actually had a high-ranking knight on his side. And this guy wasn't just strong, he was radiating confidence. Patrick glanced at the other knights flanking him. They weren't just regular soldiers either. He realized all four of them were at least intermediate rank. The situation was even worse than he thought. No wonder they were so confident. Patrick stared them down, his voice booming. So these were the guys sent specifically to deal with him. The knight just grinned, a trickle of blood running down his chin. The bastard taunted him, asking how he liked their little welcome party. He was completely surrounded, cut off from the rest of his army. And he knew right then that this was the whole plan. If he got stuck here, the entire McLean army would grind to a halt. He wasn't having it. He swung his leg over his horse, planting his feet firmly on the ground and drawing his sword. He let out a roar, his red aura exploding around him. He refused to let them win. With his aura at its peak, he charged straight at the high-ranking knight. The sound of steel on steel rang out. This time, the enemy knight grunted from the sheer force of the blow. But Patrick's strength was on another level. He pushed forward, his red aura blazing, and sent the enemy knight stumbling back. But this wasn't an one-on-one fight. While he was locked with the leader, another one of these scumbags came at him from the side with a spear. The spear dug deep into his shoulder. It was a dirty move, and it worked. Patrick roared in fury, disgusted by their lack of honor. He demanded to know if they had any pride as knights at all. The other knights just laughed it off. To them, this was just his last struggle before he was finished. But their leader, the high-ranking knight, knew better. He warned his men not to be stupid. Patrick was still a massive threat. And he was right. Patrick wasn't slowing down. He slammed his shoulder into one of the knights, knocking him completely off balance. In that split second, he rammed his sword straight through the guy's chest, taking him out of the fight for good. The knight he just stabbed coughed up blood, his eyes wide with disbelief. But Patrick didn't even look back. He was still surrounded. The leader of the enemy knights watched his man fall. But instead of getting angry, this scumbag just smiled. This was exactly what he wanted. Another knight took advantage of the opening, swinging a massive axe right at him. The heavy blade slammed into his leg, cutting deep. He staggered, barely managing to stay on his feet. And that's when it all clicked. It was a trap. The leader was just keeping him busy while the others chipped away at him from the sides. He was completely surrounded with nowhere to run. He drove his sword into the ground, using it just to hold himself up. The pain was immense, but he refused to go down. The enemy knights started laughing at him. They sneered that Logan had made the right choice by running away. They told him to be grateful that at least one of his sons would survive to continue the family name. Every word was meant to break him. Far from the fighting, Viscount Tesseron watched it all unfold with a smug look on his face. Everything was going exactly as he'd planned. This scumbag was proud of himself for keeping his best fighter a secret. He knew Patrick wouldn't stand a chance against a high-ranking knight. His plan was simple: crush Patrick, take over McLean Castle, and claim whatever prize was waiting for him there. But that's when he heard it, a distant rumbling getting closer and closer, the sound of hooves. His eyes shot wide. Cavalry troops, it couldn't be. The smug look on his face was completely gone. Just as Tesron was enjoying his victory, one of his knights galloped up to him, shouting his name. The scout was panicked. He reported that a unit of enemy cavalry had just appeared at their rear. Tesron couldn't believe it. He was sure the McLean family didn't have any more elite troops left. But the scout explained that something was off. These cavalrymen weren't even carrying spears. The only weapons they had were small crossbows. Tesron's brief moment of panic completely vanished. A smug grin spread across his face. He scoffed, calling them hunters' weapons. He casually ordered his rear soldiers and archers to just get rid of them. This clown was completely convinced they were no threat at all. Just a bunch of trash soldiers he didn't need to worry about. His men immediately turned to carry out the order. But as Tesron watched, something shot right past his face. It was a crossbow bolt and it was on fire. His smug look vanished instantly. He whipped his head around, trying to see what was happening. The cavalry unit he dismissed was charging straight for his rear guard. Leading them was the man everyone thought had run away. Our boy Logan McLean. He looked completely calm, his eyes locked on his target. Turns out those weren't just hunters' weapons. The bolts hit with explosive force, tearing through armor and men like they were nothing. Tesron's entire rear guard was being wiped out in seconds. This wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The soldiers caught in the blasts were screaming for help, their bodies being torn apart. But Logan just gritted his teeth, completely unmoved by their suffering. He just roared out the order to fire again. Tesron's face went pale. This clown finally realized he'd made a huge mistake. A second wave of arrows blotted out the sky, raining down on what was left of his men. Down on the ground, Tesron's men could only look up in horror. This poor guy couldn't believe it. He never imagined the McLeans had forces like this. The bolts slammed into them with incredible force, tearing through their ranks. Their shields and armor were completely useless. The bolts just punched right through. Men who tried to block were taken down instantly. Nothing could stop these things. One of the survivors stared in disbelief. He realized that anyone who didn't get their shield up in time was already gone. Finally, one of their commanders started screaming for a counterattack. He ordered his own archers to start firing back immediately. The archers took their positions, ready to return fire, but their volley was completely useless. The arrows fell way short, landing harmlessly in the dirt. One of the soldiers started screaming in panic. He realized they were completely out of range. Meanwhile, Logan's men just calmly reloaded, not a hint of worry on their faces. The next wave of bolts flew with terrifying speed. For the poor guy on the receiving end, there was no time to even react. The entire counterattack force was taken down in a single, brutal volley. The lone commander looked around at the chaos. He couldn't believe it. His entire rear guard had been wiped out in seconds. This clown Tesron was completely stunned. He couldn't understand how they were doing this with just crossbows. He demanded to know what kind of monster weapons Patrick had created. Tesron screamed at his men, ordering the frontline cavalry to turn around and deal with the crossbow unit immediately. The signal went up, and the cavalry in the front began the slow, difficult process of turning their entire formation around. Horses kicked up dust as the entire line of knights started to move. The soldiers exchanged glances, reacting to the sudden shift in strategy. One of the commanders jumped down from his horse, ready to lead the charge himself. Finally facing the right direction, Tesron's cavalry thundered across the field. The commander pointed forward and gave the order to wipe them out. But on the other side of the field, Logan and his men just sat there watching them come. They didn't look worried at all. Logan watched them charge with a wicked grin. They were falling right into his trap. But while Logan was springing his trap, another desperate fight was raging on elsewhere. Two swords met with a brutal crash. It was Ronian, and he was struggling just to hold his ground. The force behind the attack was overwhelming. Suddenly, his eyes shot wide. He threw himself to the side, a heavy gauntlet whistling right past his head. His opponent, a veteran knight, actually seemed impressed. He complimented the kid on the quick dodge. Just then, another knight rode up, yelling at his partner to stop playing around. He warned him that the main battle was taking a strange turn, but the first knight, Grill, just snapped back, insisting that this kid was no joke. The second knight didn't argue. He just screamed at Grill to look behind him. That's when the veteran finally turned his head to see the disaster unfolding. Ronian was breathing hard. He finally understood. This wasn't sparring. This was a real battle, and he was just a kid who'd barely awakened his powers. He tightened his grip on his sword. He told himself he couldn't lose, he had to fight for his brother too. With that thought, his resolve hardened. He wasn't going to fall here. Suddenly, the enemy knights looked completely confused. They turned their backs, swinging their swords wildly at the chaos behind them. They were completely open. That was all the opening Ronian needed. He charged forward without a second of hesitation. The clash of steel was immediate, a flurry of desperate strikes, and then silence. Ronian's blade had found its mark, piercing straight through the knight's armor. He was stunned. The enemy knight went down so easily, it barely felt real. But then he noticed something else. The ground around him was littered with arrows. All around him, the other enemy knights were stumbling and collapsing. They were being taken down one by an unseen attacker. He looked up, trying to figure out where the volley was coming from. And that's when he saw them, a unit of cavalry lined up on the ridge. And leading them was the person he least expected to see. Ronian's eyes went wide. It was Logan. A huge, relieved smile spread across his face. Logan charged forward, his expression cold and completely focused on the chaos he was creating. The enemy commander, completely losing it, screamed at his men. He ordered them to forget everything else and just attack the ones with the crossbows. Panic was spreading through their ranks. Even their war horses were getting spooked by the explosions. But Logan's men were ready. They formed a perfect line, shields up, waiting for the inevitable counterattack. He watched the enemy get into formation and just grinned. He sarcastically complimented their defense, like he was watching children play. Then he turned to his own men and gave a strange order. He told them to aim diagonally toward the ground. His soldiers were confused, but our boy just watched the enemy, his plan already in motion. A wicked grin spread across his face as he gave the final, brutal command. He told them to aim for the horses. He wasn't trying to fight their army, he was going to break it. The wicked part of him loved this. He wasn't just fighting, he was enjoying their panic. He gave the order to fire. The bolts rained down and the enemy horses screamed in terror. The enemy's charge fell apart instantly. Soldiers were desperately trying to control their panicking horses, but it was useless. Men were being thrown to the ground, trampled underfoot. Their entire formation was a mess. Logan watched the disaster he'd created. He thought to himself that they were all just a bunch of idiots. With the immediate threat handled, his mind went straight to his brother. He was just glad he'd made it in time to help Ronian. But his father was still out there somewhere. He reminded himself that he had resolved to save his family in this life. Winning a battle meant nothing if he lost them. Without a second's hesitation, he turned to his second in command. He yelled for a man named Kai to take over. He had to go. Kai couldn't believe it. He started shouting after Logan, reminding him that their entire plan was to attack from a safe distance. He just didn't get it. Victory was right there, so why was Logan charging in like he wanted to get taken out? Kai knew Logan was strong, but he was also sure that if his leader ran into a real intermediate rank knight, it would all be over. That's when he made his choice. He cursed, then roared at all his men to forget the plan and cover Logan at all costs. But Logan was already in the thick of it. He slammed into the enemy line, his sword clashing hard against the first knight in his path. The enemy knight was a big dude, and he was absolutely furious. He gritted his teeth, pushing back with all his strength. Another one of the knights just smirked, blood dripping from his mouth. This clown clearly thought they had this in the bag. But he was wrong. Logan put more force into his swing, and the bearded knight's defense completely shattered. Logan's sword sliced right through the man's armor. It was over in a single, brutal hit. The knight let out a final groan. He never stood a chance. But as Logan's forces pushed forward, the enemy commander felt a chill run down his spine. Something was strange. He watched them charge in, and none of it made any sense. They were fighting with this insane desperation, throwing themselves at his men like they had a death wish. He couldn't understand why they were being so reckless when they were clearly winning. The entire battlefield was just a mess of clashing steel. Logan's men weren't fighting like trained soldiers. They were fighting like wild animals. The commander gritted his teeth, furious. He couldn't predict their moves, and it was costing him everything. Logan didn't just break their lines. He tore right through them, a red blur in the middle of all the fire and chaos. The enemy soldiers could only watch in horror, completely helpless. But our boy wasn't even looking at them. His eyes were glowing, locked onto a single target. He swung his sword, and a wave of pure force exploded from the blade. It slammed into the enemy line, sending bodies flying and clearing a path instantly. And in the blink of an eye, he was standing right in front of the man in charge. The commander couldn't process it. He just stared, demanding to know what on earth had just happened. His eyes fell on the figure standing in the middle of the flames. It was Logan. He stood there like a force of nature, the flames just parting around him. A small smile played on his lips. Everything was going exactly as he'd planned. The enemy commander was on the ground, completely defeated. Logan let out a cough, admitting to himself that he'd cut it pretty close. And that's when his father saw him. He just screamed Logan's name, completely stunned.